There's a quiet moment, just before the bad news, that no one talks about. It happens in hospital rooms, in dimly lit offices, in the hush between breaths. A hand rests lightly on your shoulder. Not gripping. Not commanding. Just there. Warm. Still. You don't think about it. You barely register it. But something inside you shifts. The tightness in your chest loosens. Your jaw unclenches. You exhale without meaning to. And then, when the words come, "I'm sorry, it's not what we hoped for, we need to talk," you don't shut down. You don't flee. You stay. You listen. Because for a fraction of a second, before the world fell apart, someone touched you. And in that touch, you were told, without language, that you weren't alone. This is not theater. It is biology dressed as courtesy. In 1986, researchers at Cornell University set up an experiment in a busy restaurant, where waiters were instructed to briefly, inconspicuously, brush the arm of half their patrons as they handed over the check. The other half received the bill without contact. The difference was startling. Those who had been touched, even for less than half a second, left tips nearly 20% higher. No one noticed. No one remembered. They simply felt better. More understood. More seen. And because they felt safer, they gave more. This wasn't manipulation in the crude sense. There was no coercion, no demand, no hidden agenda. Just a fingertip against skin. And yet, in that fleeting contact, something ancient stirred. Oxytocin, the hormone of attachment, of mother and child, of lovers entwined in sleep, began to flow. The brain's prefrontal cortex, that vigilant guardian of logic and skepticism, softened. It didn't vanish. It merely stepped aside. Like a sentry lowering his spear after hearing a familiar voice call his name. In that quiet surrender, resistance dissolved. Compliance bloomed, not because the person wanted to give more, but because they no longer felt the need to guard themselves. Think of your mind as a locked door. For years, you've practiced building walls around it, reasons why you say no, defenses against influence, lists of reasons why trust is dangerous. But touch doesn't try to break the lock. It doesn't force or shout or argue. It simply turns the key you didn't know was there. A gentle pressure on the forearm. The brush of a thumb across your hand as you pass a coffee cup. The way a therapist leans forward just slightly, her knee almost touching yours, not to invade, but to say, "I am here with you." These are not romantic gestures. They are evolutionary whispers. Human beings evolved in groups. Our survival depended on recognizing safety in proximity. A hand on the back meant, "You're not alone." A touch on the shoulder meant, "I am not a threat." Even now, in our digital age, saturated with algorithms and ads designed to hijack attention, the oldest code remains untouched. Warmth invites openness. And openness invites surrender. What does this mean for freedom? For choice? For the illusion that we decide things independently, rationally, from within the fortress of our own minds? If a stranger can make you feel safe enough to tip more, with nothing more than the briefest contact, how many of your decisions have already been shaped by hands you didn't even notice? The real estate agent who pats your back as she says, "This is the one." The partner who takes your hand mid-argument, not to stop you, but to remind you that love still exists between the cracks. The teacher who places a hand on your desk before saying, "I believe in you." Each time, you didn't choose to be moved. You were moved because you were held. And once you've been held, you forget how to resist. We like to think of autonomy as solitude, that true independence means standing alone, unswayed, untouchable. But perhaps autonomy isn't the absence of influence. Perhaps it's the awareness of it. To recognize that the reason you agreed to that meeting, signed that form, forgave that slight, was not because you logically concluded it was right, but because someone's skin met yours, and in that collision of warmth, your fear forgot its name. You didn't become weaker. You became human. And being human, in all its fragile, trembling glory, means we are never truly isolated. We are always being nudged, by glances, by silence, by the weight of another's presence. Touch is not control. But it is connection. And connection, however small, however fleeting, has the power to rewrite the story we tell ourselves about who we are. So tonight, as you lie in bed, let yourself remember. Who touched you last? Was it your child, reaching for your hand before sleep? Was it a friend, squeezing your arm when you said you were okay, and you weren't? Was it a cashier, handing you change with a brush of fingers, and you smiled without knowing why? Each of those moments was a quiet revolution. A tiny rebellion against isolation. A whisper that said, "You are not alone. You are safe. You can let go." And maybe that's the most powerful thing of all. And yet, even without touch, there's another way to disarm resistance. One that doesn't require skin at all. Just sound. Just your name. Let's listen to how saying it softly can make someone surrender. Your name is the only word in the world that was chosen for you, and only for you. It was whispered by your mother in the quiet hours after birth, carved into school registers, signed on contracts, called out across crowded rooms, repeated in love letters and last goodbyes. No other sound carries the weight of your entire history, the laughter it's echoed through, the silence it's been swallowed by, the tears it's carried into the night. And when someone says it, truly says it, with intention, with breath held just long enough to make it feel sacred, it doesn't merely address you. It summons you. Like a spell spoken in a language older than grammar, your name pulls you back from the edges of yourself, back into the room, back into the moment, back into the skin you sometimes forget you inhabit. Dale Carnegie once wrote that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. At the time, he was speaking to salesmen and politicians, teaching them how to win favor. But science has since confirmed what he sensed intuitively. Hearing your own name activates the nucleus accumbens, the very core of the brain's reward system, the same region lit up by chocolate, music, or the face of someone you love. It isn't just recognition. It's reverence. Your brain doesn't process your name as data. It processes it as belonging. And when someone uses it, especially after conflict, especially when you're braced for judgment, it doesn't simply soften the blow. It dissolves the armor. Imagine this, you've been arguing. Your voice is tight. Your shoulders are clenched. The air between you and the other person is thick with frustration. Then, quietly, almost tenderly, they say, "I understand you're frustrated. Sarah." Not you. Not hey. Not look. But Sarah. Just your name, suspended in the pause like a single note held in a cathedral. In that instant, something inside you stills. The anger doesn't vanish, but it changes shape. It becomes something smaller. Something human. Because in that moment, you are no longer an opponent. You are not a problem to be solved. You are not a voice in a debate. You are Sarah. The one who remembers the color of the sky on your 10th birthday. The one who cried when the dog died. The one who still hums that old song under her breath when she thinks no one's listening. The name does not change the argument. It changes the listener. It reminds you, the one who is ready to fight, that you have always been seen. That even now, in this moment of tension, you are not erased. You are named. And to be named, in a world that so often reduces us to roles, employee, customer, debtor, failure, is to be granted dignity. Resistance, which thrives on isolation, cannot survive being recognized. When you hear your name spoken gently after disagreement, your defenses don't fall because you're weak. They fall because you're finally allowed to be whole again. But here lies the haunting question: is identity itself a kind of vulnerability? If your name holds such power, if the mere vibration of its syllables can undo hours of resentment, then perhaps the self is not a fortress built of convictions and boundaries, but a doorway. A threshold. Open to whoever knows how to call you home. Who gets to speak your name? Who gets to summon you back into yourself? And what happens when that voice is not gentle? What happens when your name is used not to comfort, but to manipulate? When it is whispered in a boardroom before asking for a concession you didn't want to give? When it is repeated like a mantra during a negotiation, each utterance a thread pulling you closer to surrender? When it is said too often, too carefully, too precisely, until you begin to wonder if the person saying it knows you better than you know yourself? There are those who learn to wield names like scalpels. Therapists use them to anchor trust. Salespeople use them to bypass skepticism. Cult leaders use them to create dependency, repeating your name until you believe that only they see you truly. And in those moments, the sweetness turns to seduction. The invitation becomes an entrapment. You think you're being honored, but you're being owned. You think you're being heard, but you're being shaped. And yet, we crave it. We lean in when our name is spoken. We turn toward it like a moth to flame. Even when we suspect the motive, even when we sense the artifice, we still answer. Because beneath all our defenses, beneath all our skepticism, there is a part of us that longs to be known. Not as a role. Not as a function. Not as a problem to fix. But as a person. As Sarah. As David. As May. As you. So when someone says your name, when they let it linger just a second longer than necessary, when they let it carry the weight of their attention, you must ask yourself, are they seeing me? Or are they using me? Is this kindness or calculus? Perhaps the deepest trick of all is not in the name itself, but in the fact that we are willing to be undone by it. That we would rather be manipulated by tenderness than defended by indifference. That we would trade our autonomy for the fragile gift of being remembered. And maybe that's the most human thing of all. But names are only the beginning. Because sometimes, the greatest trick isn't asking for something small. It's asking for something enormous first. And then pretending you're being reasonable. Let's step into the world of the big ask. Imagine walking into a store, and the clerk looks you in the eye and says, "Would you be willing to donate $5,000 to save the rainforest?" You laugh. Not out of joy, but disbelief. You shake your head. No, that's impossible. And then, just as you turn to leave, they smile softly and say, "Okay, how about just $5? You pause. You glance at your wallet. You pull out a crumpled bill. You hand it over. You feel good about it. You even smile back. But here's the thing, you didn't change your mind because you suddenly cared more about the rainforest. You didn't become more generous. You didn't have an epiphany. You simply stopped seeing the $5 as a donation. You started seeing it as a concession. A gift. A victory. Because compared to $5,000, $5 feels like mercy. Like compromise. Like the price of peace. And in that shift, from absurdity to reason, the act of giving becomes not an obligation, but a relief. This is the door-in-the-face technique, a psychological maneuver so elegant, so quietly devastating, that it has been used for decades by fundraisers, salespeople, therapists, and even parents trying to get their teenagers to clean their rooms. It doesn't rely on persuasion, it relies on perception. Your brain doesn't evaluate the second request in isolation. It evaluates it against the first. The $5,000 wasn't meant to be accepted. It was meant to be rejected. Its only purpose was to make the $5 feel small. To make it feel safe. To make you feel noble for agreeing to something so modest after being asked for something so monstrous. And in that contrast, compliance blooms, not because you want to give, but because you need to feel like you're still in control. Psychologist Robert Cialdini demonstrated this with startling clarity in experiments where people were first asked to volunteer 2 hours a week for a juvenile delinquency program, a staggering commitment most refused. Then, when they said no, the requester would ask if they'd be willing to chaperone children on a 1-hour trip to the zoo. Compliance rates jumped over 50%. The second request wasn't better. It was just smaller. And in the shadow of the first, it looked generous. It looked reasonable. It looked like a win. But what happens when this isn't just a trick played in stores or fundraising calls? What happens when it becomes the architecture of our lives? Think about the way we approach happiness. We are sold perfection, flawless skin, unshakable confidence, careers that sparkle like trophies, relationships that look like curated Instagram feeds. We chase these ideals with all our energy, until we collapse under their weight. And then, when we fail, we settle. We call it compromise. We call it maturity. We tell ourselves, well, I can't have that kind of love, but at least I have someone who doesn't yell. We can't live in that penthouse, but at least my apartment has a window. We can't run marathons, but I walked to the corner store today. We don't get to be extraordinary. But we can be acceptable. And somehow, in the wreckage of the impossible, we find comfort in the merely possible. We mistake reduction for resolution. We celebrate survival as success. Is this choice, or is it conditioning? Who decided that the only path to contentment was to begin with an impossible dream, and then accept its fragments as gifts? Who taught us that peace comes not from clarity, but from contrast? That to feel satisfied, we must first be overwhelmed? That to feel worthy, we must first be humbled by something too vast to reach? We are not broken. We are trained. Every time we accept less than we wanted because we were told we couldn't have more, we are playing the same game. The job interview where they offer half the salary you asked for, and you say yes because you're grateful they considered you at all. The relationship where you stop asking for emotional presents because you've learned to be thrilled when they remember your coffee order. The diet where you give up sugar entirely, fail, and then eat one cookie and declare yourself victorious. We don't negotiate with reality. We negotiate with illusions. And the most dangerous part? No one ever tells us the first ask was never real. The $5,000 wasn't a proposal, it was a mirror. A reflection of our own longing, magnified until it became unbearable. And then, when we recoiled, the smaller version was offered like salvation. As if the world had been waiting all along to let us off the hook. But what if we stopped letting them set the scale? What if we stopped comparing our worth to extremes we were never meant to meet? What if we learned to say no, not to the big ask, but to the false contrast that makes the small feel like grace? Because sometimes, the most radical act of autonomy isn't saying yes to the lesser thing. It's refusing to believe that the bigger thing was ever the only alternative. And sometimes, you don't need to ask at all. Sometimes, the most powerful tool is the absence of sound. The silence between words. Let's sit with it. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of something far more potent, the space where truth, uninvited and unguarded, begins to stir. Therapists know this. Interrogators know this. Parents who've sat on the edge of a child's bed at midnight, waiting for the confession they know is coming, know this too. You ask a question that cuts deep, why did you stop talking to her, or do you think you're happy? And then you stop. You don't rush to fill the hollow that follows. You don't offer reassurance. You don't rephrase. You simply wait. And in that quiet, something fragile unfolds. It isn't magic. It isn't mind control. It's biology meeting psychology. In communication studies, silence triggers what's called social discomfort bias, the deep, almost primal human aversion to awkward pauses. Our brains are wired to seek continuity, to stitch meaning into every gap, to turn stillness into story. When a conversation stumbles into silence, the nervous system flinches. The body leans forward. The throat tightens. The mind scrambles, not to defend, but to explain. To justify. To make the air feel safe again. And so, often, people speak. Not because they want to, but because they can't bear the weight of their own quiet. They spill secrets they didn't intend to share. They admit fears they've buried for years. They confess things they thought they'd take to the grave, all because someone had the courage to stop talking. Psychologists have timed it. After asking a difficult question, if you remain silent for 7 seconds, long enough for the other person to feel the pressure of their own thoughts, they will almost always break. Not with anger. Not with resistance. But with revelation. A sigh. A tremor in the voice. A whispered, "I guess. I was just scared." Or, quieter still, "I never told anyone that before." Silence doesn't demand. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't plead. It simply holds space, and in that holding, the other person becomes both guest and prisoner of their own inner world. They are not forced to speak. They are invited, invisibly, gently, to do so. And because they believe they are being listened to, not judged, they let down their guard. Think of the last time you asked someone a hard question and rushed to answer your own inquiry. You're not mad, right? "I just wanted to understand." It's okay if you don't want to talk about it. You filled the silence with your own fear, your need to be liked, to be seen as kind, to avoid discomfort. But in doing so, you stole the power from the moment. You turned an invitation into an interrogation. You made the quiet feel dangerous instead of sacred. What are we afraid of in silence? Not the lack of words, but the possibility that, for the first time, we might actually hear ourselves. Beneath the noise of our daily lives, the endless scroll, the curated posts, the rehearsed answers, the polite fictions, we carry echoes of truths we've learned to mute. The grief we never named. The resentment we disguised as forgiveness. The love we refused to claim because it felt too risky. Silence is the only thing that can coax those echoes into sound. And when they rise, they don't come politely. They come trembling. Raw. Unfiltered. Because silence doesn't allow for performance. There's no script. No edit. No exit. And here lies the haunting implication. Perhaps the most dangerous thing in human interaction isn't what is spoken, it's what remains unspoken, waiting patiently in the quiet between heartbeats. The things we never say because we assume no one would understand. The admissions we bury under laughter. The apologies we swallow because we're too proud, or too afraid, to offer them. Silence doesn't judge these things. It simply waits. And in its patience, it becomes the most honest confessional there is. Consider the parent who sits across from their teenager, who hasn't spoken in 3 days. Instead of demanding answers, they pour tea. They sit. They breathe. They say nothing. And after 10 minutes of quiet, the teenager says, "I hate school." Not "I'm stressed." Not "I'm tired." Just, "I hate it." And in that single sentence, everything changes. Because silence gave permission, not to fix, not to solve, not to rescue, but simply to be. We live in a world addicted to noise, to opinions, to solutions, to instant replies. We fill every pause with a meme, a comment, a distraction. We treat silence like a glitch in the system. But silence is not broken. It is the operating system beneath the chaos. It is the soil where truth grows slowly, secretly, without fanfare. And when you learn to sit in it, not out of discomfort, but out of reverence, you become not just a listener, but a sanctuary. You become the rare person who doesn't try to fix the wound, but who allows it to breathe. Who doesn't rush to heal, but who lets the healing begin. So next time you ask something real, something that matters, don't rush to fill the quiet afterward. Don't reassure. Don't explain. Don't even look away. Just wait. Let the silence stretch. Let the air thicken. Let the other person find their way back to themselves. Because sometimes, the deepest truths aren't shouted. They are whispered, by someone brave enough to stay quiet while the world falls apart around them. And when they finally speak, you'll realize you weren't listening to their words. You were listening to their soul. And when they speak, what if you could make them believe you agree? Without saying a word? All it takes is a mirror. Let's reflect. Have you ever sat across from someone, maybe a stranger on a train, a colleague in a meeting, a lover at the dinner table, and after a few quiet minutes, noticed something strange? You both reached for your coffee at the same moment. You both leaned forward when the conversation grew intimate. You both crossed your legs, right over left, as if choreographed by an unseen hand. You didn't plan it. You didn't notice it until later. And yet, there it was, a rhythm between you, a silent dance of posture and motion that felt almost sacred. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't luck. It was mirroring, an ancient, wordless language of belonging, written not in speech but in skin, in breath, in the subtle tilt of a head. Mirroring is not learned. It is inherited. From the moment we are born, we imitate. Our first words are echoes of our mother's voice. Our earliest smiles are responses to her face. We don't learn to bond through logic, we learn through repetition. The infant who mimics the caregiver's tongue movements or facial expressions is not practicing mimicry, they are building trust. Their brain doesn't distinguish between self and other in those early months. They absorb. They reflect. They become. And as adults, we never truly stop. We just get better at hiding it. When you sit with someone you feel safe around, your body begins to synchronize, your breathing slows in unison, your gestures fall into step, your tone softens to match theirs. This isn't manipulation. It's biology dressed in civility. Studies show that when a person subtly mirrors another's posture, speech rhythm, or even blink rate, their perceived trustworthiness increases by nearly 30%. Not because they're charming. Not because they're clever. But because similarity, however small, signals safety. Your brain doesn't analyze the gesture. It feels it. And in that feeling, resistance dissolves. Think of how easily you open up to someone who seems like you, even if you've never met before. Same accent. Same laugh. Same way of pausing before answering. These aren't superficial traits. They're signatures of shared neural wiring. When someone mirrors you, your limbic system, the emotional core of your brain, registers them as kin. As part of the tribe. As safe. And so you lower your guard. You speak more freely. You reveal more than you intended. You don't realize you've been invited into intimacy, not through grand declarations, but through the quiet ballet of mirrored motion. But here's where the mystery deepens. If trust can be manufactured through mimicry, if connection can be engineered by copying someone's stance, their cadence, their unconscious habits, then what does that say about love? About friendship? About loyalty? Are we drawn to people because they are inherently good, or because they have learned, consciously or not, to become mirrors of our deepest selves? Have you ever loved someone not because they were perfect, but because they seemed to understand you without explanation? Because they finished your sentences? Because they laughed at the same obscure jokes? Because they sat in silence the way you needed them to? What if that understanding wasn't intuition, but imitation? And if that's true, then perhaps every meaningful relationship has been, at least in part, a performance, a gentle, loving act of becoming the reflection of another. The partner who learns to speak softly because you do. The friend who adopts your humor because it makes you feel seen. The therapist who leans forward exactly when you need to feel held. None of this is deceitful. It is tender. It is human. But it also means that the most profound bonds we form may not be forged in authenticity alone, but in the artful replication of it. We don't just love people who are like us. We love people who have learned how to become us. This raises a haunting question. Who are we, really? Are we fixed entities, anchored in our own unique essence? Or are we fluid, ever-shifting compositions shaped by the reflections we encounter? Do we choose our identities, or do we inherit them, piece by piece, from the people who lean too close, who mirror our silence, who echo our pain until we begin to believe it's ours alone? We like to think of ourselves as original, as singular, as the authors of our own souls. But what if we are simply the sum of all the faces we've mirrored, and all the faces that have mirrored us back? What if your laughter is borrowed from your father, your skepticism from your teacher, your stillness from a lover who taught you silence was safer than speech? What if the parts of you that feel most true are not yours at all, but echoes of those who came before you, learning to hold you by becoming you? There is no shame in this. In fact, there is beauty. To mirror is to honor. To reflect is to love. To move in sync with another is to say, without words, I see you. I am here with you. I will not leave you alone. But awareness changes everything. When you notice the mirror, you can choose whether to let it shape you, or to step out of its frame. Because once you realize that trust can be built not through honesty alone, but through mimicry, you begin to wonder. Who among your closest friends has learned to copy you so well that you forgot you were ever different? Who among your lovers has absorbed your fears so completely that you no longer know which ones belong to you? And when you finally look in the mirror, truly look. Are you seeing yourself? Or the sum of everyone who ever loved you enough to become you? And when they speak, what if you could make them believe you agree? Without saying a word? All it takes is a mirror. Let's reflect. A smile isn't always joy. Sometimes, it's the quietest form of armor, the softest shield we wear when we must say no without breaking the other person's heart. You've seen it, the colleague who declines your invitation to lunch with a warm grin and a murmured, I wish I could, but I'm swamped. The friend who turns down your emotional confession with a tender chuckle and, you know I'm here for you. The parent who says, not tonight, sweetheart, while brushing their child's hair and smiling as if they're offering candy instead of closure. In each moment, the refusal is firm, but the smile is gentle. And somehow, against all logic, the person on the receiving end doesn't feel rejected. They feel cared for. Even grateful. This is not accidental. Research from the University of California found that when someone delivers a refusal with a genuine smile, even one that lasts only a fraction of a second, the recipient is significantly more likely to comply with a subsequent request. Not because the no was softened into a yes, but because the smile transformed the meaning of the refusal entirely. Your brain doesn't register the words alone. It reads the face. And when a smile accompanies a boundary, your limbic system interprets it not as rejection, but as protection. They're not saying no to me, your mind whispers. They're saying no to something else, to their own exhaustion, to their limits, to the weight of the world. They're protecting us both. In that subtle shift, the emotional sting vanishes. The wall becomes a bridge. The denial becomes an act of love. We are trained to equate kindness with agreement. We've been taught that saying yes is caring, that saying no is cold, that refusal is failure. But what if the most compassionate thing you can do is say no, with warmth? What if gentleness, when paired with clarity, doesn't weaken boundaries, it sanctifies them? A smile in the face of refusal doesn't erase the no, it recontextualizes it. It says, this limit is not about you. It's about me. And I care enough to tell you honestly, without making you feel small. That distinction changes everything. It allows the other person to hold space for your humanity, rather than resenting your absence. But here lies the unsettling question: can compassion be a tactic? Can tenderness become a tool, not to heal, but to manage? If a smile can disarm resistance so effectively, then how many times have you agreed to things, not because you wanted to, but because you feared the silence that would follow a flat, unsmiling no? How many times have you said yes to a favor, a meeting, a conversation, because the person smiled as they asked, and you couldn't bear to break that fragile, luminous moment? You didn't say yes because you meant it. You said yes because you didn't want to hurt them. Because their smile made you feel guilty for wanting to protect yourself. And what does that say about the nature of our relationships? Are we building connections through honesty, or through performance? Are we loving people by being open, or by performing openness? Are we choosing to give because we want to, or because we've learned that giving, even reluctantly, is the price of being liked? Consider the workplace where managers smile while denying raises. The romantic partner who smiles while declining intimacy. The friend who smiles while refusing to listen. Each time, the smile makes the refusal palatable. But beneath the warmth, resentment may fester. The giver feels used. The receiver feels manipulated. And neither speaks of it, because to call out the smile would be to accuse someone of kindness. To name the tactic would be to destroy the illusion that care and control can coexist. Perhaps the most dangerous thing about this technique is not its effectiveness, but its invisibility. No one calls it manipulation. No one labels it exploitation. We call it being nice. We call it emotional intelligence. We praise the person who says no with grace, as if their ability to soften the blow is a moral triumph. But what if grace, in this context, is just another form of obedience? What if we've been conditioned to value politeness over truth, that a relationship is worth preserving only if it never causes discomfort? And yet, there is a paradox here too. The most honest relationships are often built on boundaries spoken gently. The healthiest people are not those who always say yes. They are those who say no, and still make you feel safe. Who refuse without shame. Who set limits without apology. Who smile not to deceive, but to say, I am not abandoning you. I am honoring myself. So ask yourself, when was the last time you said yes because you were afraid to say no? When did you smile through a refusal you didn't mean, just to keep the air soft? And when did you let someone else's smile convince you that their no wasn't really a no at all? Because sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is refuse. And sometimes, the most honest thing you can offer is a smile. Not to hide the truth, but to carry it gently. So the other person doesn't have to carry the weight of your silence. And if you learn to do that, to say no with warmth, and mean it, you stop needing permission to exist. But what if you want them to say yes? Even when you're saying no? What if rejection becomes acceptance? Let's turn pain into permission. Now imagine being given a choice, but having no real option at all. Let's enter the illusion of freedom. Would you prefer tea or coffee? It sounds like freedom. A simple, polite invitation to choose. You pause, consider, and pick one. You feel in control. You feel heard. But what if neither option was ever meant to be a real alternative? What if the question wasn't designed to honor your preference, but to ensure compliance? The tea and coffee are not choices at all. They are illusions. The real decision, the only one that mattered, was made before you were asked. You will have a beverage. You will not say no. This is forced choice framing, a psychological architecture so elegant, so deeply embedded in our daily lives, that we rarely notice it until we're already inside. It doesn't lie. It doesn't coerce. It simply narrows the field of possibility until the only path forward feels like self-determination. Do you want to start Monday or Tuesday? Would you rather pay monthly or annually? Should we meet for lunch or dinner? Each question presents two options, both acceptable to the asker, both unacceptable as rejections. The third option, the one you might truly want, is never mentioned. Not because it's taboo. Not because it's dangerous. But because it would disrupt the illusion. If you were offered the choice between yes and no, you might say no. But when you're offered Monday or Tuesday, you don't even think about saying no. You assume it's already been decided. And so, you choose. We encounter this everywhere, in advertising, in politics, in parenting, in romance. Do you want the red car or the blue one? When the dealership knows you're buying today, regardless. Would you like to vote for candidate A or candidate B? When both candidates represent the same corporate interests. Should I take you out for pizza or pasta? When your partner has already booked the table and just wants you to play along. These aren't invitations, they are performances. Carefully staged rituals where the script has already been written, and your role is to believe you're improvising. The power lies not in the options presented, but in the absence of the ones that aren't. The silence around the unspoken alternative, the no, the neither, the I'd rather do something else, is louder than any answer. And yet, we embrace these illusions willingly. We call them convenience. We call them efficiency. We tell ourselves, it's easier this way. But ease is not freedom. And comfort is not autonomy. How many times have you chosen between two paths, only to realize later that neither led where you wanted to go? You picked the safer job over the risky dream. You stayed in the relationship because it was better than being alone. You voted for the lesser evil because the other side was worse. You didn't rebel. You didn't refuse. You chose. And in choosing, you surrendered. Because you were never given permission to say, I don't want either. What does this say about free will? About democracy? About the very structure of human agency? If every major decision in our lives, from what we buy to who we elect to how we spend our time, is framed within pre-selected boundaries, then perhaps our sense of choice is not an expression of liberty, but a carefully cultivated hallucination. We are not making decisions. We are selecting from menus designed by others, corporations, institutions, cultural norms, who profit from our belief that we are free. Democracy becomes a vending machine. Insert your ballot, press A or B, receive your predetermined outcome. Romance becomes a restaurant menu. Choose your entree, but don't ask for dessert unless it's on the list. Our desires are not ignored, they are curated. Our dissent is not silenced, it is rendered invisible. And here lies the most haunting implication: if every choice is designed, then who designed the design? Who decided that these two options, and only these two, are acceptable? Who determined that yes must always come wrapped in a false binary? Was it the marketers? The politicians? The parents who said, pick your college major, but it has to be practical? Or was it us? Did we internalize these frameworks so completely that we now police our own thoughts, rejecting anything outside the frame as too radical, too inconvenient, too impossible? We have been taught to equate freedom with selection. But true freedom isn't choosing between two doors. True freedom is realizing there's a window. That the walls can be broken. That the menu can be rewritten. That the question itself, that tea or coffee, might be the first lie you've ever been asked. So next time someone offers you a choice, pause. Not to decide, but to wonder. What were the other options? Who excluded them? And why did they make you believe these were the only ones that mattered? Because the moment you stop accepting the illusion of choice, you begin to see the architecture. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And yet, sometimes, the most powerful persuasion doesn't come from what you say. It comes from what you repeat. Let's listen to echoes. The best arguments aren't yours. They never were. They belong to the other person, buried in their hesitation, tangled in their pauses, whispered between the lines of their doubt. You don't need to convince them. You don't need to outwit them or overwhelm them with facts. All you have to do is listen. Not to respond. Not to counter. But to gather. To collect the fragments of their own thinking, their fears, their hopes, their half-formed convictions, and then, gently, like a gardener replanting a seed, return them to them, rearranged, polished, reframed, as if they had always meant to say what you wanted them to say. This is echoing persuasion, not manipulation, not trickery, but the quiet art of reflection made strategic. It begins with silence. With open-ended questions. What's holding you back? How do you see this playing out? What would success look like for you? You ask not to win, but to uncover. And then, you wait. You let them speak. Let them stumble over their thoughts. Let them revise themselves mid-sentence. Let them reveal the real reason they're resisting, not the one they've rehearsed, but the one they only admit when they think no one's listening. And when they finish, when the air settles and the vulnerability lingers, you respond. Not with your argument. Not with your solution. But with theirs. Them, I just think we need more time to think this through. You, so you're saying we shouldn't rush, and that thoughtful pacing leads to better outcomes? It's subtle. Almost invisible. You haven't changed their mind. You've mirrored it. You've taken the raw material of their hesitation and shaped it into the very conclusion you hoped they'd reach. And because it sounds like their own voice, because it carries the rhythm of their breath, the cadence of their doubts, they don't feel persuaded. They feel understood. And when you feel understood, you don't resist. You align. You nod. You say, yes, that's exactly it. This isn't new. Therapists use it to help clients arrive at their own epiphanies. Negotiators use it to turn opponents into allies. Parents use it to coax reluctant teenagers into compliance. The technique works because it bypasses defensiveness. No one resists an idea they already believe. But when someone else voices it, when it's wrapped in unfamiliar language, it becomes threatening. When you say it, it feels like an invasion. But when they say it, even if you just help them find the words, it feels like revelation. Their logic becomes your weapon. Their fear becomes your bridge. Their resistance becomes their surrender. But here's where the deeper mystery unfolds. Are our beliefs truly ours, or are they stories we tell ourselves, only to have them handed back to us, polished and renamed by someone who listened more closely than we did? How many times have you argued passionately for a position, only to hear it repeated back to you, by a friend, a partner, a colleague, with such clarity that you suddenly realized, I didn't come up with this. I just thought I did. You believed you were defending your truth. But you were merely echoing something you'd absorbed from somewhere else, a book, a conversation, a childhood memory, and now, someone else has returned it to you, refined, elevated, stripped of your uncertainty. And if your thoughts can be borrowed, reshaped, and returned as if they were always theirs, then who owns your mind? Is identity just a collection of echoes? A mosaic of phrases you've heard, internalized, and mistaken for originality? Have you ever had a moment, late at night, alone, where you realize the conviction you hold most dearly was something someone else said to you 10 years ago, and you've been repeating it ever since, believing it was yours? If so, then perhaps every argument we have isn't truly with another person. Perhaps we're simply arguing with ourselves, through the mirror of someone else's voice. We think we're debating ideology, but we're really trying to reconcile the parts of ourselves we've forgotten we once owned. We think we're persuading others, but we're really asking them to help us remember who we are. And what happens when you realize this? When you catch yourself using someone else's words as your own, when you notice how easily your opinions shift depending on who's listening, when you see how often your deepest truths are just reflections, borrowed from people who saw you more clearly than you saw yourself. It's unsettling. It's humbling. It unravels the illusion of autonomy. But it also opens a door to greater honesty. If your mind is not a fortress but a gathering place for echoes, then perhaps the most radical act isn't defending your beliefs, but questioning where they came from. Who planted them? Who whispered them into your ear during a vulnerable moment? Who took your confusion and turned it into certainty? Because once you understand that persuasion doesn't come from force, but from listening deeply enough to hear the truth someone already holds, hidden beneath their noise, then you stop trying to change minds. You start helping them hear themselves. And in that stillness, in that gentle repetition of their own voice back to them, you don't win the argument. You give them back their soul. Sometimes, you don't need logic at all. Just one word. One tiny, meaningless word. But it unlocks doors. Let's say it aloud. It's not what you say. It's why you say it. Even if the why is meaningless. Even if it makes no sense at all. In 1978, psychologists conducted a quiet experiment in a university library. Researchers approached people waiting in line to use a photocopier and asked, simply, "Can I go ahead?" 60% of people allowed them to cut in. Not a bad success rate, but then they tried something else. They added one word, because. Can I go ahead? Because I need to make copies. Compliance jumped to 94%. Not because the reason was compelling. Not because the requester was more persuasive or charming. Not because the request became any more reasonable. The reason, "I need to make copies," was absurdly obvious. Everyone in line was there to make copies. The justification didn't add information. It didn't justify urgency. It didn't explain hardship. It merely stated the blindingly apparent. And yet, with that single word, because the refusal mechanism in the human mind shut down. People didn't pause. They didn't question. They didn't weigh logic. They just stepped aside. This wasn't persuasion. It was programming. The brain doesn't process because as a logical connector. It processes it as a trigger, a neural shortcut honed over millennia. In ancestral environments, explanations, even weak ones, signaled cooperation. A child saying, "I'm crying because I'm tired," was more likely to be comforted than one who simply wailed. A hunter saying, "I'm leaving the camp because I saw tracks," was followed without hesitation. The word "because" signaled intentionality. It signaled that action was rooted in thought, even when it wasn't. And so, evolution wired us to respond to it automatically. We don't analyze the reason. We don't evaluate its merit. We react to the structure. To the sound. To the rhythm of justification itself. We are not rational creatures. Not truly. We are pattern-matching machines, trained by repetition to associate certain phrases with safety, with permission, with compliance. We obey the sound of explanation as if it were truth. We nod along to hollow logic because our brains have learned, If someone gives a reason, even a stupid one, they're not acting randomly. They're acting with intent. And intent can be trusted. Think about how often this plays out in your own life. You say yes to a favor because someone says, "I really need help because I'm swamped." But you know they're never swamped. You've seen them scroll through social media for hours. Yet you still say yes. You agree to a meeting because someone says, "I think we should talk because it's important." But they never tell you why. You still show up. You sign a contract because the salesperson says, "This package is best for you because it includes everything." Even though you already had everything you needed. You forgive an apology because they say, "I'm sorry because I didn't mean to hurt you." Even when you know they did. We don't crave reasons. We crave the illusion of reason. We don't want logic, we want the feeling that logic exists. That someone has thought. That someone has cared enough to offer a rationale, however flimsy. And in that gesture, the offering of a reason, we find permission to surrender. To let go of resistance. To give in. What does this say about free will? About decision-making? About the fragile architecture of our autonomy? Are we ever truly choosing? Or are we simply responding to the cadence of language that sounds like choice? Are we following paths because we believe they lead somewhere meaningful, or because someone whispered because at the right moment, and our brains clicked into autopilot? We like to believe we live in a world governed by reason. We pride ourselves on being thoughtful, analytical, deliberate. But how many of your daily choices, your purchases, your commitments, your silences, your agreements, are shaped not by deep reflection, but by the mere presence of a single syllable? A child asks to stay up late. Why, you say? They answer, "Because I'm not tired." And you say yes. A coworker asks you to cover their shift. "Because I have a doctor's appointment." Even though you know they're going to brunch. A partner says, "I need space because I've been thinking a lot." And you let go, not because you understand, but because they gave you a reason. We are not resisting the request. We are resisting the absence of justification. We are terrified of randomness. Of caprice. Of meaninglessness. So we cling to the sound of reason even when it's empty. And perhaps that's the most profound trick of all. We don't need good reasons to comply. We only need reasons at all. So next time you hear "because," whether from a stranger, a friend, a boss, or yourself, pause. Not to judge the reason, but to notice the reflex. Ask yourself, do I believe this? Or do I just believe the word that came before it? Because once you realize that compliance isn't earned by logic, only by the illusion of it, you begin to see how easily you've been led. How gently you've surrendered. How often you've said yes, not because you wanted to, but because you needed to believe someone had a reason. And once they've spoken, what if you simply repeated the last thing they said? Not to argue. Not to correct. Just to echo. Watch what happens. Sometimes, the deepest truths don't come when you speak. They come when you stop. When you let silence pool around the last thing they said, like water gathering in the hollow of a stone. You don't offer advice. You don't reframe. You don't correct. You simply repeat it. Not as a question. Not as a challenge. But as an echo. Softly. Slowly. With just enough lift at the end to turn their statement into an invitation. Them, "I just don't think I'm ready." You don't think you're ready. And then, you wait. Not 3 seconds. Not 5. But long enough for the air to thicken. Long enough for their mind to scramble past the surface answer, past the polite defense, past the story they've rehearsed for everyone else. And then, quietly, almost against their will, they continue. I mean, maybe I am. But what if I fail? What if everyone sees how lost I really am? They didn't say that before. Not out loud. Not to anyone. Not even to themselves. But now, because you held the space, because you reflected their words back like a still pond, they found the courage to step into deeper water. This is not manipulation. It's not trickery. It's active listening weaponized with grace. In psychology and therapy, this technique is called mirroring or reflective listening. But when used intentionally, not as a clinical tool, but as a quiet act of presence, it becomes something more profound. It doesn't persuade. It reveals. It doesn't fix. It uncovers. You don't lead them to your truth. You hold up a mirror so they can finally see their own. Think of the last time someone asked you how you were doing, and you answered with the usual, fine. Then they paused. Looked at you. And softly said, you said you're fine. Just that. No pressure. No follow-up. Just the repetition, hanging there like smoke. And suddenly, you broke. You told them about the sleepless nights. About the letter you never sent. About the grief you thought you'd buried. Not because they pushed. But because they listened so deeply that you felt safe enough to be unmasked. We are terrified of being truly heard. Not because we have nothing to say, but because when someone hears us, we realize how much of ourselves we've been hiding. We've spent years polishing our answers, smoothing our edges, crafting responses that keep people at arm's length. But when you reflect their final phrase back to them, you remove the armor. You say, without saying anything, I hear you. And I'm not going to fix you. I'm not going to judge you. I'm just going to sit here while you find the rest of what you need to say. Therapists use this because they know healing isn't about giving answers. It's about creating space for the person to become their own guide. The most powerful interventions often consist of nothing more than silence and repetition. You feel alone. You think no one understands. You're afraid to ask for help. Each time, the client doesn't respond with agreement. They respond with expansion, with confession, with tears, with realization. Because when you hear your own voice spoken back to you, you begin to believe it's real. You begin to believe it matters. You begin to believe you're worth listening to. But what does that say about us? Is healing just repetition? Is connection just the art of letting someone hear their own voice long enough to believe it's true? If all it takes to unlock a soul is to repeat its last whisper, then who are we when we do this? Are we guides? Or mirrors? Are we healers, or simply witnesses to the private revolutions happening inside others? And if you can make someone confess their deepest fear by echoing their hesitation, then who owns the truth? Is it theirs? Or is it yours, shaped by the way you chose to reflect it? Did you help them find their voice, or did you give them the language to name what they already knew? There is something haunting in this power. To hold someone's vulnerability in your hands and return it to them, unchanged, and watch them crumble open. To stand beside them as they unravel, not to catch them, but to let them fall into their own understanding. You don't fix them. You don't save them. You simply give them the gift of being heard. And yet, what if you misuse this? What if you echo not to honor, but to trap? What if you repeat their words not to free them, but to expose them? To force confession where none was requested? To turn intimacy into interrogation? Then you are no longer a mirror. You are a prison guard. The difference lies not in the technique, but in the intention. In the silence between repetitions. In the gentleness of the pause. In whether you listen to understand, or to control. Because when you truly listen, you surrender your need to be right. Your need to solve. Your need to fix. You let go of your agenda. And in that surrender, you become the safest place they've ever been. So next time someone says something fragile, something half-formed, trembling on the edge of speech, don't rush to answer. Don't fill the gap. Don't offer comfort. Just repeat their last word. Let it hang. Let it breathe. Let them hear it again. And watch, as they do, the moment they begin to speak not to you, but to themselves. And once they do, you'll realize you weren't helping them find their voice. You were simply reminding them they had one. Now imagine a single yawn. Just one. And suddenly, the whole room follows. Let's catch it. It's contagious. You don't know why it happens. One person yawns, just a slow, deep, involuntary opening of the mouth, eyes closing slightly, and then, almost instantly, someone else follows. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room is caught in the same rhythm, a soft inhale, a quiet exhale, the body leaning back as if surrendering to gravity. No one speaks. No one commands. There's no agreement. Just a silent, unspoken cascade. One yawn becomes 10, becomes 20, becomes the unifying pulse of the space. It isn't boredom. It isn't fatigue. Not really. You've been in rooms where everyone is exhausted and no one yawns. And you've been in rooms where people are wide awake, and still, the yawn spreads like ink in water. This isn't coincidence. It's biology. Deep, ancient, preverbal biology. Yawning is governed by mirror neurons, the same brain cells that fire when we see someone smile and feel joy, when we witness pain and flinch, when we hear laughter and begin to chuckle without knowing why. These neurons don't distinguish between self and other. They blur the boundary. When you observe an action, your brain simulates it, as if you're doing it too. And yawning, more than any other gesture, is a primal echo. A shared rhythm. In group settings, a single yawn doesn't just signal tiredness, it signals safety. It says, without words, the tension is lowering. The vigilance can ease. You can let go. In primates, yawning synchronizes group behavior, aligning alertness levels so that members rest or move together. In humans, it's the same, but masked by culture. We don't call it social regulation. We call it being tired. But when a manager yawns during a tense meeting, the energy shifts. The shoulders drop. The clenched jaws loosen. The debate slows. The air grows heavier, not with exhaustion, but with surrender. People stop arguing. They stop defending. They start nodding. And soon, the meeting ends, not because the decision was made, but because the collective will to resist dissolved. This is empathy encoded in physiology. Not the kind we choose. Not the kind we practice with intention. But the kind we inherit, a biological handshake between strangers. Your yawn doesn't mean you're sleepy. It means you're open. And openness, in a group, is contagious. It invites others to be open too. To soften. To release control. To stop performing. Think about how often this happens outside of meetings, in classrooms, in hospitals, in families. A child yawns at dinner. The parent yawns. The sibling yawns. Suddenly, the house feels quieter. Calmer. The arguments fade. The urgency evaporates. What was once a battlefield of competing needs becomes a shared breath. The yawn didn't solve anything. It simply allowed everything to settle. But what if we've been using this instinct backward? What if the most powerful forms of influence aren't speeches or demands, but the subtle, unconscious transmission of state? What if conformity isn't enforced through rules, but caught like a virus, through sighs, through stretches, through glances, through yawns? We think we follow leaders because they speak boldly. But maybe we follow them because they breathe slowly. Maybe we obey not because they command, but because they relax. Maybe the quietest leaders aren't the loudest. They're the ones who yawn first. And here lies the unsettling implication. Are we all just vessels for each other's states? Carriers of moods, emotions, tensions, energies that we didn't choose to hold? Who among us has walked into a room and felt the weight of someone else's anxiety before they even spoke? Who has left the gathering feeling inexplicably drained, only to realize later that the person beside them hadn't slept in days, and their exhaustion had seeped into your bones? We don't just absorb words. We absorb breath. We absorb silence. We absorb fatigue. When someone yawns, they're not asking for rest. They're offering it. And we, in our neural wiring, accept it even when we don't want to. Even when we're energized. Even when we have work to do. Because the brain doesn't care about productivity. It cares about belonging. And belonging requires synchronization. So ask yourself, whose exhaustion are you carrying right now? Whose stress did you inherit at breakfast? Whose silence did you echo in the elevator? Whose yawn became your own? You didn't choose to feel tired. You didn't decide to lose your edge. You didn't plan to stop fighting. But you yawned anyway. Because someone else did. And in that moment, you weren't alone. You were part of something older than language. Something deeper than thought. A rhythm passed down through generations. If you're calm, I can be calm. If you rest, I can rest. If you let go, I can let go too. This is not weakness. It is connection. But it is also vulnerability. Because if you can lower the temperature of a room with a single yawn, then you can also raise it with a sigh. You can spread fear with a pause. You can ignite panic with a sharp inhale. You can turn a crowd into a herd. Not by shouting, but by breathing. So next time you feel yourself starting to yawn, don't cover your mouth. Don't apologize. Don't pretend it's nothing. Just notice. Who else is mirroring you? Who else is letting go because you did? And who, in this moment, is relying on your breath to find theirs? Because the most powerful thing you ever do might not be what you say. It might be what you let out. Quietly, unconsciously. Without meaning to. And how many others follow you into the quiet? And what if scarcity wasn't about lack, but about perception? What if wanting something more wasn't about value, but about the story you were told? Let's talk about rarity. You don't want diamonds because they sparkle. You don't crave the limited edition sneaker because it's more comfortable. You don't long for that exclusive retreat because it's more peaceful than your backyard. You want them because you were told, repeatedly, urgently, with hushed reverence, that they are rare. That word, rare, is not a descriptor. It is a trigger. A primal alarm bell buried deep in the limbic system, honed over millennia to say, this is scarce. Grab it before it's gone. Evolution didn't care about aesthetics or branding. It cared about survival. Food was scarce. Water was scarce. Mates were scarce. The moment something appeared in limited supply, the brain lit up, not with desire for the object, but with fear of loss. And so, when modern marketers whisper, only 3 left, or this offer expires tonight, they aren't selling a product. They're activating an ancient code. Your prefrontal cortex, the part that questions, analyzes, delays, flickers and dies. In its place rises a reflex older than language, take it now. Or never. It doesn't matter if the scarcity is real. The algorithm doesn't care. The algorithm only cares that you believe it. A hotel sends an email, 72% of guests who viewed this room booked within 24 hours. You've never seen the room. You've never stayed there. But suddenly, it feels urgent. You click. You pay. Later, you learn the statistic was fabricated. The room had been available for weeks. But by then, the damage was done. Your brain had already rewritten reality. What was ordinary became extraordinary, not because it changed, but because you were made to feel it was slipping through your fingers. This isn't manipulation in the crude sense. It's persuasion dressed as revelation. The illusion of scarcity doesn't lie, it frames. It takes something abundant and makes it feel like a secret. It turns mass production into mystique. It transforms a commodity into a relic. And we, in our vulnerability, fall for it, not because we're gullible, but because we've been trained to equate value with exclusivity. We assume that if something is hard to get, it must be meaningful. If it's hidden, it must be sacred. If few have it, it must be meant for us. But what if everything you crave, your career path, your relationship ideal, your version of success, isn't desired because it fulfills you, but because you were told no one else has it? What if your longing for that perfect life is just the echo of an advertisement whispered into your subconscious since childhood? What if the dreams you think are uniquely yours, moving to the coast, starting a business, finding the one, were planted not by your soul, but by 1,000 targeted ads, influencer posts, TED Talks, and magazine covers all repeating the same mantra, this is rare. This is yours if you act now. We live in a world where scarcity is manufactured daily. Not out of necessity, but out of profit. The artist who sells one-of-a-kind prints, knowing they'll re-upload them next week. The course that promises only 10 spots, while maintaining a waiting list of 5,000. The partner who says, I'm not like other people, I'm different, when really, they've rehearsed that line for every new lover. We chase uniqueness not because we seek depth, but because we fear being ordinary. And the systems around us exploit that fear relentlessly. So who decides what you're meant to want? Is it you? Or is it the algorithm that knows your browsing habits better than your best friend? Is it the influencer who made you feel inadequate unless you own that candle? Is it the cultural narrative that whispers, if you're not growing, you're falling behind? What happens when your desires are no longer born from your inner landscape, but from curated scarcity feeds designed to keep you chasing? When your passion becomes a purchase, your identity a subscription, your love a limited time offer? And yet, we keep buying. Because the moment we stop believing something is rare, we stop wanting it. We lose interest. We move on. Not because we're fickle, but because we've been conditioned to equate worth with limitation. We assume that if it's easy to find, it's not valuable. If it's everywhere, it's meaningless. But what if the opposite is true? What if the most profound things in life, silence, presence, stillness, time, love, are the most abundant? What if the thing you're searching for, the peace, the belonging, the purpose, isn't hidden behind a paywall or a countdown timer? What if it's already here? Right now. In the ordinary. In the unremarkable. In the moments you've dismissed because they weren't rare enough to deserve your attention? We are taught to covet the exclusive. To worship the elusive. To believe that meaning is found in scarcity. But perhaps the deepest truth is this. The rarest thing of all is not what you can't have. It's what you refuse to see because you're too busy chasing what you've been told you should want. Because once you realize that your longing was manufactured, once you hear the echo of marketing in your own heartbeat, you begin to ask, who decided I needed this? Who told me I wasn't enough without it? And if I let go of the need to be special, who would I be? The answer might terrify you. Or it might set you free. But desire isn't the only thing shaped by tone. Sometimes, it's the pace of your voice. Slow down. And watch how attention bends. Speed speaks confidence. Slowness speaks authority. You've felt it before, the person who walks into a room and immediately commands attention, not because they shout, not because they gesture wildly, but because they speak slowly. Each word is placed like a stone in still water. There are pauses, not awkward ones, but deliberate ones, like breaths between notes in a slow symphony. You lean in. Not because you're trying to catch every syllable, but because something in the rhythm pulls you toward it. You stop scrolling. You stop thinking of your next reply. You simply listen. And in that listening, you surrender your resistance. You grant them space, not just to speak, but to be. This isn't charisma. It's neuroscience. Studies across communication psychology have consistently shown that people who speak slowly are perceived as more intelligent, more composed, more trustworthy, even when their content is identical to someone speaking rapidly. A 2014 study from the University of Michigan found that participants rated slower speakers as more credible and thoughtful, regardless of the complexity of the message. Why? Because slowness implies control. Control over time. Control over emotion. Control over the silence between thoughts. When you speak slowly, you signal that you are not reacting, you are responding. That you are not rushing to fill space, but choosing to inhabit it. That you are not afraid of the quiet. High-speed speech, by contrast, carries an unspoken anxiety. It's the voice of urgency, of defensiveness, of nervous energy. It's the chatter of someone trying to convince you, and themselves, that they have it all figured out. The faster the words tumble out, the more your brain reads, they're scared you'll interrupt. They're scared you won't believe them. They're scared of the silence. And so, instinctively, we tune out. We don't trust haste. We distrust the frantic. But slow speech? Slow speech doesn't beg for belief. It earns it. It says, I am not here to perform. I am here to be heard. And if you need to sit with this, then sit with it. There is power in the measured pace. In the way a single sentence can hang in the air long enough for its weight to settle. In the way a pause after I understand becomes a cathedral of empathy. In the way a leader says, we will move forward, and then waits, just one beat too long, for the room to absorb it. No one interrupts. No one rushes. The silence becomes part of the message. And in that silence, authority is not asserted, it is absorbed. Think of the great orators, the quiet leaders, the therapists who hold space without filling it. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't race through his speeches, he let each phrase breathe. His cadence was deliberate, almost liturgical. He didn't rush to the climax, he built it, note by note, breath by breath. That's why I Have a Dream still echoes decades later, not because of the words alone, but because of the silence that followed them. He gave us time to feel them. In our world, where attention is fragmented, where responses must be instant, where TikTok soundbites replace reflection, the slow speaker is revolutionary. To speak slowly is to resist the tyranny of speed. It is to say, quietly but firmly, I will not be rushed. I will not be hurried. My time is not yours to consume. And so, presence becomes power. Not the power of volume, but of vibration. Not the power of dominance, but of depth. When you speak slowly, you don't just command attention, you command reverence. People don't just hear you. They feel you. Your voice no longer travels through the air. It travels through their bones. It settles in their chest. It lingers after you've finished speaking, like the last chord of a cello played in an empty hall. What does this say about influence? Is true leadership not about being the loudest, but the calmest? Is real authority not about controlling others, but about holding space so completely that others choose to align with you? Is patience, not aggression, not force, not persuasion, the ultimate form of dominance? Because when you slow down, you stop trying to win. You stop trying to prove. You stop needing to be understood. And in that surrender, you become impossible to ignore. Consider the parent who says, "I'm going to count to 3, and then counts, each number stretched thin, spaced apart like footsteps on snow. The child stops. Not because they're afraid of the number 3, but because the slowness tells them, this is serious. This matters. And I am not leaving until you meet me here. Consider the therapist who waits 10 seconds after a client says, "I don't know." Not to fill the void. Not to rescue. Just to hold it. And then, the client breaks. They cry. They confess. They say what they've never said aloud. That silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything the client couldn't yet name. And so, when you learn to speak slowly, you don't just become heard. You become a vessel for truth. Your voice no longer carries words. It carries stillness. It carries gravity. It carries the weight of all the things left unsaid, in you, and in them. And in a world that shouts to be noticed, the quietest voice is the one that changes everything. And when you speak, where you end your sentence matters more than what you say. Drop your voice and watch the air change. The difference between a question and a statement isn't always in the words you choose, it's in the way they end. "I think we should go?" That rising inflection at the final syllable, soft, hesitant, floating upward like a leaf caught in a breeze, doesn't declare. It begs. It apologizes. It trembles. It says, "I'm not sure. Please don't disagree. I think we should go." A downward sweep. A quiet landing. The voice settles into its final note like a stone dropped into deep water. No ripple of doubt. No flutter of uncertainty. Just presence. Just conviction. This is not subtle. It is fundamental. In vocal linguistics, upward inflection at the end of a declarative sentence, known as uptalk or high-rising terminal, is interpreted by the brain as a sign of insecurity. It triggers subconscious evaluation. Is this person unsure? Do they need my approval? Are they asking for permission to exist in this space? Conversely, a downward inflection, a firm, low finish, signals certainty, stability, authority. It doesn't ask for validation. It assumes it. And when your brain hears that tone, it doesn't analyze the content. It responds to the posture. Women, in particular, are socialized to speak this way. From childhood, girls are praised for being polite, sweet, agreeable. They're taught to soften their edges, to qualify their statements, to leave room for others to interrupt. "I'm sorry, but, just a thought, maybe we could." These aren't just phrases, they are linguistic cages. Over time, even the most confident women begin to end their sentences with an upward lilt, not because they lack conviction, but because they've been trained to fear sounding too strong. And so, their authority is quietly eroded, not by what they say, but by how they say it. Their voices become questions without answers. Declarations that beg for confirmation. But here's the truth, your voice doesn't just carry sound. It carries weight. Every rise and fall, every pause and pitch, sends a silent message to everyone listening. Do I belong here? Do I deserve to be heard? Am I safe to trust? When you end a sentence with a downward glide, you don't just sound more authoritative, you become more authoritative, not because you changed your words, but because you changed the architecture of your presence. You stopped asking for permission to occupy space. You stopped apologizing for taking up air. You let your voice land, And in doing so, you gave others permission to take you seriously. Leaders know this. Politicians train for it. Therapists practice it. CEOs rehearse it in front of mirrors. They don't shout louder. They drop lower. They let their final syllables sink. Not because they're angry. Not because they're forceful. But because they understand that gravity is more powerful than volume. Think of the last time someone spoke to you with certainty, their voice steady, their tone grounded, and you didn't question them. You nodded. You followed. You believed. Now think of the last time someone spoke to you with an upward lilt, even if they said something perfectly reasonable. I think we should reschedule. Even if it made sense, you hesitated. You wondered, are they sure? Should I push back? Is this really what they want? You didn't doubt the idea. You doubted the voice delivering it. And that's the tragedy. We have been conditioned to equate humility with weakness, and strength with harshness. We believe that to be heard, we must be loud. To be respected, we must be aggressive. But real authority doesn't roar. It resonates. It doesn't demand attention, it attracts it, effortlessly, through the stillness of its ending. What if your voice carries the weight of your self-worth? What if every upward inflection is a whisper of internalized doubt? Every I'm sorry, every maybe, every trailing question mark in speech, isn't just a habit. It's a surrender. A tiny, repeated act of shrinking yourself so others won't feel threatened. Who benefits from this? The systems that thrive on quiet compliance. The workplaces where men dominate meetings because their voices sound decisive. The classrooms where girls are praised for being good listeners while boys are rewarded for speaking up even when they're wrong. The relationships where partners learn to interpret a woman's tentative tone as indecision, rather than as the product of decades of conditioning. We are taught to sound uncertain, so we'll stay quiet. So we won't challenge. So we won't disrupt. So we won't claim too much space. But when you learn to let your sentences fall, like stones into still water, you reclaim something deeper than confidence. You reclaim sovereignty. You stop performing politeness. You stop apologizing for existing. You stop asking for permission to be seen. And suddenly, people listen. Not because you raised your voice, but because you lowered it. Because you stopped trying to be liked, and started trying to be true. Try it now. Say aloud, I'm ready to lead this project. Now say it again, with the last word rising. Then again, with the last word dropping. Feel the difference? One sounds like a plea. The other sounds like a promise. It's not about volume. It's not about aggression. It's about gravity. Your voice doesn't need to shout to be felt. It just needs to land. And when it does, when your final word sinks, slow and certain, into the silence, you don't just command respect. You become the silence itself. Still. Deep. Unshakable. And once you master that, once you let your voice fall like a stone into water, and watch the ripples spread without needing to explain them, you realize you were never meant to be louder. You were meant to be deeper. Now imagine inviting someone to correct you, knowing full well they'll only praise you. Let's play humble. The quickest way to make someone feel important, truly, deeply, viscerally important, is not to praise them. Not to flatter them. Not even to agree with them. It's to pretend you're wrong. Say this. I might be mistaken, but I think we should try launching the campaign on Tuesday. Or, I could be completely off base here, but what if we focused on the user's emotional response first? Or, quieter still, I'm probably missing something, but I've always wondered why we don't just stop. And then, you pause. You don't defend it. You don't justify it. You don't argue for your own idea. You leave it hanging, fragile and open, like a door left slightly ajar. And almost instantly, they lean in. Their eyes brighten. Their posture shifts. They take a breath, and then they begin. Not to disagree, but to correct you. To refine your half-formed thought. To polish your clumsy phrasing into something brilliant. Actually, Tuesday wouldn't work because of the holiday, but Wednesday at 10 a.m., that's perfect. And you're right about the emotional angle, we've been ignoring that entirely. The data shows. Suddenly, they're not just agreeing with you. They're defending your idea. They're owning it. They're making it better. And you? You sit there. Quietly. Gratefully. As if you'd never had the insight yourself. This is reverse flattery. A psychological maneuver so elegant, so disarmingly gentle, that it bypasses resistance entirely. It doesn't manipulate through force, it invites cooperation through humility. You don't convince them you're right. You give them the sacred role of being right for you. Why does this work? Because ego is the most powerful motivator in human interaction. Not love. Not logic. Not fear. Ego, the deep, quiet, universal need to feel seen as competent, intelligent, indispensable. When you say, I might be wrong, you are handing someone a mirror, and then stepping back so they can admire their own reflection. They don't see you as weak. They see you as generous. As trusting. As someone who values their mind enough to let them shape the outcome. And in that moment, they don't just help you, they fall in love with the version of themselves they become when they're helping you. Think of the last time someone asked you for advice, not with confidence, but with uncertainty. I have no idea if this makes sense, but... You didn't roll your eyes. You leaned forward. You felt useful. Valued. Seen. That's not coincidence. That's design. We are all chasing validation. We are all, at some level, trying to prove we matter. And influence isn't about dominating the conversation, it's about creating space where others can feel like they're saving the day. You don't lead by telling people what to do. You lead by letting them believe they came up with it. This is why great teachers don't lecture. They ask questions that sound like mistakes. Why great therapists don't fix. They reflect back confusion until the client sees their own clarity. Why great partners don't argue. They say, maybe I misunderstood you, and suddenly, the other person is explaining themselves with tenderness, with patience, with devotion. But here's the haunting implication. Are we all just mirrors, reflecting each other's need to feel worthy? Is every meaningful collaboration, every breakthrough, every alliance built not on truth, but on the shared illusion that one of us was lost, and the other was the guide? Is influence merely the art of handing someone a mirror, so they fall in love with their own reflection? If ego is the currency of connection, then the most powerful people aren't those who know the most. They're those who know how to make others feel like they know everything. They don't hoard knowledge. They gift it away, wrapped in doubt. They don't seek credit. They offer vulnerability. And in doing so, they become irreplaceable, not because they're brilliant, but because they make everyone around them feel brilliant too. What happens when you stop needing to be right? When you stop insisting your idea is the best one? When you stop defending your position? When you stop needing to win the argument? You become dangerous. Not because you're clever, but because you remove the only thing people fight for, the chance to feel superior. In a world obsessed with proving themselves, the person who says, I might be wrong, becomes a sanctuary. People rush to fill the space you've created, not because they're noble, but because they're hungry. Hungry for significance. Hungry for recognition. Hungry to believe, even for a moment, that they are the ones holding the light. And you? You stand beside them, in silence, watching them build the very thing you imagined. Letting them name it. Letting them claim it. Letting them believe they did it alone. And when they turn to you, glowing with pride, and say, "Thank you for seeing this," you smile and say nothing. Because you already knew. They weren't thanking you for your idea. They were thanking you for giving them the chance to believe they had it first. This isn't manipulation. It's generosity disguised as weakness. It's power surrendered in order to be multiplied. And perhaps the greatest truth of all is this. The most influential people in any room aren't the loudest. They aren't the most confident. They aren't even the smartest. They're the ones brave enough to say, "I don't know. I might be wrong. Help me see this." And in those quiet admissions, in those humble invitations to be corrected, they don't lose authority. They become its source. Because true leadership isn't about having the answer. It's about knowing how to make someone else feel like they do. And once you learn that, once you stop needing to be right, you no longer compete for influence. You become its quiet architect. But here's the twist. Instead of asking why, ask what? And watch how the entire landscape of thought shifts. Why did you do that? The question hangs in the air like a verdict. It doesn't invite conversation, it demands explanation. It assumes guilt before innocence. It turns a moment of vulnerability into an interrogation. You ask it to understand, but what you get is defensiveness. A litany of justifications. A retreat behind logic, armor built from reasons that sound reasonable but feel hollow. The person doesn't feel heard. They feel judged. And when they feel judged, they stop sharing. They start protecting. Now try this. What would you do if you were in my place? The shift is subtle, but seismic. Instead of digging into the past, its mistakes, its motives, its regrets, you open a door to the future. Instead of asking for proof of rightness, you ask for imagination. Instead of placing them on trial, you invite them into your skin. You don't say, "Explain yourself." You say, "Step beside me." And something remarkable happens. They pause. Not to defend, but to imagine. They think about your exhaustion, your fear, your quiet desperation. They remember what it felt like to be overwhelmed, unseen, or afraid, and suddenly, they're not arguing with you. They're walking with you. In their mind, they see your life through your eyes. They feel the weight of your choices. And in that empathy, resistance dissolves. This isn't psychology as technique. It's psychology as compassion made strategic. Why anchors people to their past? It forces them to justify decisions already made, to rationalize pain, error, or failure. It says, "You are defined by what you did." But what would you do, says, "You are not trapped by your history. You can choose again." In therapy, this distinction separates healing from humiliation. A therapist who asks, "Why did you stay in that relationship?" may uncover trauma, but they also risk reinforcing shame. A therapist who asks, "If you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?" invites restoration. The answer doesn't fix the past. It illuminates the path forward. In parenting, it transforms power struggles into connection. A child slams the door. Parent 1, "Why are you being so rude?" Child shuts down. Parent 2, "If you were me, how would you feel right now?" The child hesitates. Then quietly, "I guess I'd feel hurt." No lecture needed. No punishment required. Just a single question that turned defiance into understanding. In negotiations, it turns adversaries into allies. A vendor refuses your price. Instead of pressing, "Why won't you budge?" You say, if you were me, trying to make this work within our budget, what would you suggest? Suddenly, they're not fighting you. They're problem-solving with you. They offer alternatives. They compromise. Because you didn't challenge their position, you honored their perspective and invited them into co-creation. We live in a world obsessed with blame, with assigning fault, with tracing every misstep back to its origin. We believe that understanding the why will bring resolution. But often, it brings only repetition, the same stories, retold with more conviction, more justification, more wounded pride. We are trapped by our reasons. We cling to them like relics, proof of our suffering, our righteousness, our survival. We bury ourselves under layers of explanation because we've been taught that to explain is to be forgiven. But forgiveness doesn't come from justification. It comes from recognition. From seeing someone's humanity, not their rationale. When you replace why with what, you stop judging. You stop analyzing. You stop needing to fix the past. And you begin creating. You begin building bridges, not out of logic, but out of possibility. You stop trying to prove who was right. And instead, you ask, what could be right together? Is this true understanding? Or is it just a gentler kind of control? Perhaps both. Because influence never exists in pure neutrality. Even kindness has intention. Even empathy can be wielded. But there is a vital difference between manipulation and invitation. Manipulation seeks to bend another to your will. Invitation seeks to expand their capacity to choose. When you ask, what would you do? You are not controlling the outcome. You are expanding the field of possible outcomes. You are saying, your voice matters. Your imagination matters. Your perspective is not a threat, it's a gift. And in that space, where judgment is suspended, where the past is no longer a courtroom, and the future is wide open, something sacred occurs. People begin to change. Not because they were forced. Not because they were shamed. But because they were seen, not as failures, but as creators. They realize they are not prisoners of their history. They are architects of what comes next. And when you give them that realization, quietly, gently, without fanfare, you don't win the argument. You change the game. You turn conflict into collaboration. You turn isolation into intimacy. You turn resistance into resonance. Because sometimes, the most profound transformation doesn't come from changing someone's mind. It comes from helping them see that they've always had the power to change their own story. All you had to do was stop asking why they broke. And start asking what they might build instead. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing at all. Just wait. Let the silence pull them in. A pause isn't empty. It's pregnant. Not with silence as absence, but with possibility as presence. When someone asks you a difficult question, do you still love me? Why did you quit? Are you sure this is the right path? Your instinct is to respond immediately. To fill the space before it becomes awkward, before they think you're hiding something, before the silence grows teeth and bites into the air between you. But what if the most powerful thing you could say wasn't said at all? What if the answer didn't live in your lips, but in the breath you held before speaking? Studies in communication and negotiation show that when you wait 3 seconds, just 3, before replying to a challenging question, something profound happens. The other person doesn't notice the pause as hesitation. They interpret it as depth, as deliberation, as gravity. Their brain, wired to seek meaning in every gap, assumes you are weighing consequences, sifting through layers of emotion, considering angles they haven't even thought of. And in that assumption, their defenses lower. Their curiosity rises. And then, they speak again. Not to challenge you. Not to correct you. But to answer for you. Them, do you think we should move? You, silence. 3 slow seconds. Eyes steady. Them, I mean, I know it's a big step. But honestly, I've been thinking about it for months. I just didn't want to say anything because I thought you'd think I was being selfish. But I really do believe we'd be happier somewhere quieter. Somewhere with more light. They didn't need your answer. They needed to hear themselves say it out loud. You didn't persuade them. You created the space where their own truth could emerge. This is not manipulation. It is reverence. It is the quiet art of holding space, not to fix, not to guide, not to rescue, but to allow. In therapy, this is called the therapeutic pause. In mediation, it's called the power of stillness. In parenting, it's the moment you don't jump in after your child says, "I hate school," and instead sit quietly until they add, "It's just, no one gets me there." We have forgotten how to listen, not just with our ears, but with our silence. We equate responsiveness with care. We believe that to be present, we must speak. But sometimes, presence is the refusal to speak. It is the courage to let the air thicken. To let the weight of the question settle, not on you, but on them. What does this say about wisdom? Is wisdom the ability to remain silent, or is it the courage to let others speak their truth before you speak yours? How many times have you rushed to answer someone's pain with advice, when all they needed was to feel heard? How many times have you interrupted a friend mid-sentence with your own story, only to realize later they hadn't finished theirs? How many times have you answered a question before the person had even finished asking it, because you were afraid of the silence, not because you wanted to understand? We fear silence because we mistake it for failure. We assume that if we don't fill the void, we'll be seen as indifferent, uninterested, cold. But silence, when used intentionally, is the opposite of cold. It is warm. It is safe. It says, "I am not here to fix you. I am here to walk beside you while you find your way." And in that walk, the deepest answers aren't spoken by you. They are whispered back to you by the quiet. By the trembling voice that finally breaks after 3 seconds of stillness. By the confession that emerges when the pressure to perform dissolves. By the realization that blooms not from your insight, but from theirs, nurtured in the fertile ground of your patience. Think of the last time someone asked you a hard question, and you didn't answer right away. Did you feel anxious? Did you want to rush? And then, when you stayed silent, did they begin to unravel something they'd never said aloud before? That's not magic. That's human. We are not rational beings who make decisions through logic alone. We are emotional creatures who discover truth through vulnerability, and vulnerability only arises when safety is guaranteed. And silence? Silence is the ultimate guarantee. It says, you can be messy. You can be uncertain. You can stumble. I won't interrupt. I won't fix you. I won't take over. I'm here. Just keep going. In leadership, this transforms teams. A manager asks, "What's blocking us?" and waits. No one speaks. Then, after 5 seconds, someone whispers, "I think we're scared to fail." And suddenly, the whole team exhales. The real problem is named. Not by the boss. Not by the expert. By the quietest voice in the room, finally given permission to speak. In relationships, this saves marriages. One partner says, "Do you still want to be with me?" The other pauses. Breathes. Then, after the silence stretches like twilight, the first partner adds, "I think I'm the one who needs to change." No argument. No defense. Just 2 people, sitting in the quiet, letting truth rise like steam from hot tea. What if the deepest healing doesn't come from words spoken, but from words unspoken, waiting patiently for someone to finally say them aloud. What if the most powerful response you can ever give is not an answer at all? Just stillness. Just presence. Just the courage to let the silence breathe. Because in that silence, in that sacred, trembling pause, you are not losing control. You are giving it away. And in doing so, you hand someone back their own voice. And when they speak, use their words, not yours. Let them become your voice. You don't need to persuade. You just need to repeat. Not in the robotic, parrot-like way of mimicry, but with the tenderness of a mirror held up to someone's soul. You listen, not to wait for your turn to speak, but to hear the shape of their truth. The words they choose. The metaphors they lean on. The rhythm of their hesitation, the quiet sigh before a confession, the way they say I guess, or I mean, like a bridge between what they feel and what they dare to name. And then, when you respond, you don't use your language. You use theirs. Them, I just feel like I'm stuck in this loop, like I keep running but never getting anywhere. You, so it feels like you're running in circles, and no matter how hard you push, the finish line keeps moving. Them, I don't know if I can do this alone anymore. It's like carrying a suitcase full of rocks and no one sees how heavy it is. You, it's not just that you're tired, it's that you've been carrying something invisible, and no one even noticed the weight. You haven't changed their mind. You haven't offered a solution. You haven't argued, corrected, or advised. You've simply returned their own heart back to them, in a voice they recognize. This is linguistic mirroring. Not manipulation. Not trickery. But resonance. A quiet, almost sacred alignment of inner worlds through the shared architecture of language. When someone hears their own metaphor reflected back to them, with care, with precision, with silence between the words, they don't feel understood. They feel seen. Not as a problem to be solved, but as a person who has been quietly screaming into the wind, and finally, someone has turned around and said, I heard you. That's exactly how it feels. People don't resist ideas. They resist language. Because language is identity. The way we speak is the map of our inner landscape. If you speak to someone in their own dialect, their own imagery, their own cadence, you aren't speaking at them. You're speaking from within them. You become the echo of their deepest self. And when you do, resistance dissolves. Because the part of them that was bracing for judgment, for dismissal, for misunderstanding, stops fighting. It relaxes. It exhales. Think of the last time someone truly listened to you, not to fix you, not to respond, but to reflect. You said something vulnerable, maybe about loneliness, or fear, or failure, and they didn't offer advice. They didn't say, you should. They didn't say, that's not so bad. They said, so it's like you're standing in a room with no doors, and everyone else is outside laughing? And suddenly, you cried. Not because they fixed anything, but because they named what you couldn't. In therapy, this is called reflective listening. In sales, it's called mirroring. In love, it's called intimacy. And yet, we rarely practice it. We are trained to respond, not to receive. To correct, not to confirm. To lead with our wisdom, not to kneel at the altar of another's truth. We rush to solve. To advise. To share our story. But in doing so, we erase theirs. What happens when you stop trying to convince? When you stop trying to be right? When you stop inserting your voice into the space between theirs? You become a vessel. A quiet channel through which someone else's hidden self can finally speak. And here lies the haunting implication. Are we all just echoing each other? Are our conversations not exchanges of ideas, but searches for reflections of our own inner voice? Do we long not to be persuaded, but to be recognized? To hear ourselves spoken aloud by someone else, in a tone we've forgotten we used? If persuasion is merely the act of making someone hear themselves, then who is the speaker? Is it you? Or is it them, through you? When you mirror their words, you don't win them over. You remind them they were already whole. You don't give them insight. You hand them back the lens they lost. And in that moment, the conversation stops being yours. It becomes theirs. You become the quiet companion who helped them find their own voice again. But what does this mean for connection? For power? For love? If the most profound moments of understanding arise not from your brilliance, but from your ability to repeat their pain, their joy, their confusion, in their own language, then perhaps every meaningful relationship is an act of mutual reflection. We don't fall in love because someone is perfect. We fall in love because they make us feel like we've been heard, for the first time. Your partner says, "I feel like I'm always waiting for you to notice me." You say, "So you're saying you've been invisible, even when you're right here?" They cry. They hold you tighter. Not because you fixed it, but because you named it. Your child says, "No one likes me at school." You say, "It feels like you're standing in a crowd where everyone's talking, but no one's listening to you." They nod. And for the first time in weeks, they talk. This isn't technique. It's reverence. It is the most radical form of love, giving someone the gift of being understood, without needing to change them. And if you can do this, if you can let go of your need to be the one with the answer, the one with the wisdom, the one who speaks last, you become not just a listener. You become a sanctuary. A place where people can finally breathe. Where they can say what they've never dared to say. Where their voice, once buried under shame or noise, rises, not because you pushed it out, but because you made space for it to come on its own. So next time someone shares something tender, something raw, something real, don't reach for your own words. Don't offer your solution. Don't try to fix it. Just repeat it. Back to them. In their own rhythm. With their own metaphors. Let them hear themselves. Let them believe it's true. Because you believed it first. And in that quiet exchange, you won't persuade them. You'll remind them. They were always enough. Now imagine telling someone they're free to choose, while carefully removing every other option. Let's walk the tightrope of false freedom. Freedom isn't the absence of control. It's the illusion of it. You've heard it 1,000 times, polite, reassuring, disarmingly gentle. You're free to choose whether to join the program. You can leave anytime. It's totally up to you. They sound like liberation. They feel like respect. They are offered with open hands, as if the decision rests entirely in your lap. And yet, every word is carefully placed. Every option, every alternative, every possible path not taken, has already been removed. This is illusionary autonomy. A masterclass in influence disguised as permission. It doesn't force. It doesn't demand. It doesn't manipulate through threat or guilt. Instead, it seduces through the sacred promise of choice, while ensuring that choice only exists within boundaries drawn by someone else. In marketing, it's everywhere. Sign up today, or don't. No pressure. But the button is glowing. The timer is ticking. The testimonials are flashing. The scarcity is implied. The alternative, doing nothing, is framed not as valid, but as passive, regrettable, even cowardly. In politics, it's subtler. The future is yours to shape. But the candidates on the ballot were selected by party elites, funded by the same donors, bound by the same corporate interests. You vote for change, but the architecture of power remains untouched. You believe you're choosing between two futures, but both futures operate under the same rules. Even in relationships, it echoes. I'm not trying to control you, I just want you to be happy. But the options presented are limited: stay and compromise, or leave and face loneliness. The third option, that you might need something neither of them can offer, is never named. Never allowed. Never seen. This technique is not new. Cult leaders have used it for centuries. No one is forcing you to stay. You're here because you want to be. The follower believes they chose their prison. The soldier believes he enlisted for freedom. The consumer believes she bought her identity. And we fall for it, not because we're gullible, but because we crave autonomy so deeply that we'll accept any version of it, even when it's hollow. What makes this so dangerous is its moral veneer. Unlike overt coercion, which feels violent and wrong, illusionary autonomy feels noble. It sounds respectful. It sounds democratic. It says, we trust you. But what it really says is, we've already decided what you'll decide. Think about democracy itself. 2 major parties. 2 platforms. 2 sets of promises. One promises lower taxes. The other promises more social services. Both protect corporate interests. Both rely on surveillance capitalism. Both fund militarized policing. And yet, we are told we live in a free society because we get to pick between them. Is democracy just a beautifully designed maze? A labyrinth where the exit is always just out of reach, and the walls are made of our own belief and choice? We are taught that freedom means selection. That to be free is to have options. But what if true freedom is not the ability to choose between 2 pre-approved paths, but the ability to question why those paths exist at all? To ask, who built this maze? Who decided these are the only doors? Who benefits from my believing I'm choosing freely? And here's the most chilling implication: when you believe you're free, you're less likely to resist the walls around you. You don't rebel against a system you think you helped create. You don't protest a cage you believe you walked into willingly. You don't dismantle a structure you think you designed. So when a corporation says, you can opt out anytime, you don't see the subscription trap, you see empowerment. When a government says, voting is your right, you don't see the suppression of third parties, you see participation. When a therapist says, it's your choice to heal, you don't see the financial barrier, you see personal responsibility. We internalize control until it becomes conscience. We mistake curated freedom for real freedom. We call obedience agency. We call compliance self-determination. But freedom without alternatives is not freedom. It is performance. And the most insidious form of control isn't the one that chains you. It's the one that convinces you the chains are jewelry. So when you hear someone say, it's totally up to you, pause. Not to respond, but to wonder. What options were never mentioned? What alternatives were erased before I even arrived? Who decided these were the only choices worth making? Because the moment you realize you've been handed a menu, not a map, you begin to see the kitchen. You begin to see who's cooking. And who's eating. You don't need to rage. You don't need to scream. You just need to notice. To look at the choices laid before you, and ask, quietly, are these mine? Or were they made for me? And sometimes, the less you say, the more you control. Let's practice silence again. But this time, with intention. The loudest voices aren't the most persuasive. The quietest ones are the most remembered. You've seen them, the person who walks into a meeting and says nothing for the first 10 minutes. They don't fidget. They don't rush to fill silence with opinions. They listen. They observe. They nod, not out of agreement, but as if they're gathering the shape of the room. Then, when they speak, it's only once. One sentence. Clear. Measured. Unadorned. And suddenly, the entire room falls still. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was rare. Because it carried weight. Because it didn't need to shout to be heard. Studies in leadership and organizational behavior consistently show that people who speak less are perceived as more confident, more intelligent, and more authoritative, even when their contributions are no more substantive than those of the chatterers. Why? Because silence doesn't beg for attention. It commands it. In a world saturated with noise, constant updates, overlapping conversations, performative expertise, silence becomes a radical act of presence. It says, I am not here to prove I belong. I am here because I already do. Constant talking, by contrast, is an unconscious plea. It reveals anxiety. It signals the need to be liked, to be validated, to be seen as competent before you've even had time to think. Each word becomes a brick in a wall built to keep others at bay, not because you're hiding something, but because you're afraid they'll see how little you know. You talk to fill the void inside yourself. And in doing so, you make yourself forgettable. But the quiet speaker? They don't speak to be heard. They speak because there is something worth saying. And when that moment comes, their words land like stones dropped into still water. Each ripple expands slowly. Each meaning lingers. People don't just hear them, they remember them. They replay the phrase in their minds later that night. They cite it in meetings weeks afterward. They attribute wisdom to it, not because it was complex, but because it was sparing. Because it was given space to breathe. This is the art of strategic omission. Not what you say, but what you choose not to say. Not the volume of your voice, but the gravity of your stillness. Think of the great leaders throughout history. Gandhi didn't rally crowds with speeches every day. He spoke rarely, and then, only when his silence had become unbearable. His words were sacred because they were scarce. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't speak constantly. He let the air thicken with longing before he said, I have a dream. That phrase endured because it wasn't repeated, it was revealed. In therapy, the most effective clinicians often say less than their clients. They don't offer solutions. They don't interrupt. They sit. They wait. And in that waiting, the client begins to unravel their own truth, not because they were guided, but because they were held. In relationships, the partner who doesn't feel the need to explain every emotion, to justify every reaction, to defend every silence, becomes the safest person in the room. Their quiet isn't cold. It's deep. It says, I don't need to convince you I'm okay. I'm okay. And in that assurance, the other person feels safe enough to be vulnerable too. What if influence isn't about speaking, but about holding space? What if the most powerful people aren't those who command rooms, but those who allow them to breathe? We live in a culture obsessed with expression. We believe that to matter, we must be loud. To be valuable, we must be visible. To be loved, we must be understood. But perhaps the opposite is true. Perhaps the deeper you go, the quieter you become. Perhaps wisdom isn't accumulated through speech, but through restraint. Through listening. Through the courage to remain silent when everyone else is shouting. And what happens when you stop explaining yourself? When you stop justifying your boundaries? When you stop apologizing for your needs? When you stop trying to make people understand why you feel the way you do? Do you become invisible? Or do you finally become real? Because when you stop explaining, you stop inviting judgment. You stop giving others permission to misinterpret you. You stop handing over the power to define you. You simply are. And in that being, quiet, unapologetic, unwavering, you become magnetic. People lean in. They wonder what you're thinking. They respect your depth. They assume you know more than you say. And sometimes, that assumption is all you need. You don't need to convince anyone. You don't need to win them over. You just need to be still enough for them to hear themselves thinking about you. In a world that rewards noise, the quietest person is the most dangerous. Not because they have all the answers, but because they refuse to pretend they do. They don't fill silences. They inhabit them. They don't chase attention. They attract it by refusing to demand it. And when you learn to hold space instead of filling it, you don't lose your voice. You rediscover its true power. Not in volume, but in resonance. Not in quantity, but in quality. Not in speaking, but in being. So next time you feel the urge to explain, to justify, to clarify, to defend, pause. Breathe. Let the silence settle. Ask yourself, is this necessary? Or is it just noise? Because the most profound influence doesn't come from speaking louder. It comes from speaking less. And letting the quiet carry the weight of everything you never said. And if you stopped explaining yourself, would you finally be heard? But what if you didn't need to convince them? Just to make them believe they're already good? Let's plant a seed. Tell someone they're kind, and they'll become kinder. Tell them they're smart, and they'll tackle problems they once avoided. Tell them they're resilient, and suddenly, they rise after every fall. This isn't flattery. It's not empty praise. It's not the kind of compliment you give to make someone feel good for 5 minutes. This is something deeper. Something older than language. Something written into the very architecture of human identity. Belief alters behavior. In 1968, psychologists Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson conducted a now famous experiment in an elementary school. They told teachers that certain students, randomly selected, with no actual basis in prior performance, were intellectually gifted. These children were no different from their peers. Their IQs were average. Their past grades, unremarkable. Yet by the end of the year, those children had made dramatic gains in cognitive ability. Not because they were born smarter, but because their teachers believed they were. And because the teachers believed, they treated them differently. They smiled more. They called on them more. They gave them harder questions. They waited longer for answers. They saw potential where none had been claimed before. And the children? They began to see it too. They started raising their hands. They stopped doubting their thoughts. They began to believe, quietly, deeply, that they belonged among the bright ones. The label didn't change their intelligence. It changed their behavior. And their behavior changed their reality. This is the Pygmalion effect, the self-fulfilling prophecy of expectation. When someone is seen as capable, they act more capably. When they are seen as worthy, they begin to feel worthy. When they are held in high regard, even if falsely, they begin to live up to it. Your words don't just describe them. They sculpt them. Think of the child labeled shy. Every time they hesitate to speak, it's reinforced, oh, she's just quiet. No one pushes. No one invites. No one expects her to lead. So she learns to shrink. She learns silence is safety. She becomes the person everyone expected. Now imagine the same child being told, "You have such thoughtful ideas, I wish more people spoke up like you." Suddenly, she raises her hand. Not because she's brave, but because someone believed she was. We are all mirrors, reflecting back what we are shown. If you call someone broken, they will break, not because they are, but because they learn to believe it. If you call someone lazy, they will drift, not because they lack motivation, but because they stop trying to prove you wrong. If you call someone unlovable, they will push love away, not because they don't want it, but because they've learned to expect rejection. But if you call someone whole, even when they feel fractured, even when they've forgotten how to believe it themselves, then something begins to stir. A quiet voice inside whispers, maybe. I am enough. A small courage rises. A hesitation softens. A door opens, just slightly, that they thought was locked forever. And this is not magic. It's biology. It's psychology. It's the way the human mind integrates external perception into internal identity. We do not exist in isolation. We exist in relation. Our sense of self is not forged in solitude, it is shaped by the reflections offered to us by others. Parents, teachers, partners, friends, colleagues, strangers who say one thing in passing that echoes for years. Who are we, really? Are we the sum of our stories, the traumas, triumphs, choices, regrets we carry? Or are we the stories others tell about us, repeated until we come to believe them as truth? There is no neutral ground. Every glance, every tone, every comment, you're so strong, you always overthink, you're the life of the party, you never follow through, is a brushstroke on the canvas of someone's soul. And we are all artists. Sometimes unintentionally. Sometimes cruelly. Sometimes miraculously. You don't need to fix someone to change them. You just need to see them differently. A manager who says, "You're the one who notices the details no one else does," will find that employee staying late to perfect reports, not out of obligation, but because they now believe they are indispensable. A parent who says, "I've never met anyone who cares as much as you do," will watch their child grow into compassion without ever being told to be kind. A friend who says, "You're the only one who gets me," will find that person showing up, with presence, with loyalty, with a depth of connection they didn't know they had. This is the quiet revolution of affirmation. It doesn't demand change. It simply names what is already there, hidden beneath layers of doubt, shame, or neglect. And here's the most beautiful, terrifying truth. You may never know which word saved someone. Which sentence pulled them back from the edge. Which phrase became the foundation of their new life. You might say it in passing. You might say it while rushing out the door. You might say it while tired, distracted, half asleep. And still, it lands. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can offer another person isn't advice, isn't help, isn't even love. It's simply this: I see you. And I believe you are more than you think you are. So next time you speak to someone, not to correct, not to advise, not to fix, look them in the eye and say something true. Say, "You're patient. You're courageous. You're the reason this group keeps going. You matter more than you know." Don't wait for them to earn it. Don't wait for them to prove it. Just say it. Because somewhere, in the quiet of their heart, they've been waiting for you to say it first. And if you do, you won't just change their day. You might change their life. And what if you didn't need to tell them they're great? What if you just told them? Everyone else already thinks so. Let's talk about crowds. We don't follow leaders. We follow the crowd. It's not rebellion that moves us. It's conformity. Not because we're weak, but because we're wired to belong, to be safe, to avoid standing out in a world where isolation once meant death. You've seen it, the hotel room sign that says, 75% of guests reuse their towels. You read it, you pause, and without thinking, you hang yours up again, even though you didn't plan to. You didn't care about the environment. You didn't feel guilty about waste. You just didn't want to be the one who didn't do what everyone else did. The result? Towel reuse increases by 26%, not because of environmental messaging, not because of guilt, not even because of price, but because of the quiet, invisible force of social proof. Or consider the ad that boasts, over 1 million customers trust us. You don't know if it's true. You don't know who those customers are. But you nod anyway. Because if so many people believe it, maybe it's safe. Maybe it's right. Maybe you can relax, because someone else has already done the work of choosing for you. This isn't persuasion through reason. It's persuasion through herd instinct. Social proof is the oldest lever in human influence, and the most potent. It doesn't ask you to think. It asks you to feel. To sense safety in numbers. To assume that if enough people are doing something, it must be good. Must be wise. Must be correct. And we obey it, relentlessly, in every corner of our lives. We buy the same shoes as our coworkers because they look popular. We vote for candidates not because we studied their policies, but because polls say they're leading. We stay in jobs we hate because everyone else does. We marry because it's time, not because we're ready. We post vacations on Instagram not because we love them, but because we saw others posting theirs, and suddenly, not posting felt like failing. We don't live our lives. We mirror them. Every purchase, every opinion, every relationship decision, we filter it through the same silent question, what would most people do? And when we answer it, we don't feel like we're surrendering. We feel like we're fitting in. Like we're being smart. Like we're avoiding risk. But here's the haunting truth. If your values, opinions, purchases, relationships, are shaped entirely by what most people do, then who are you? Are you the author of your own story? Or are you simply the echo of 1,000 unseen choices, made by strangers you'll never meet, whose motivations you'll never understand? Who decided that happiness looks like a beach vacation? That success means a corner office? That love means marriage by 30? That peace means scrolling quietly through feeds filled with curated perfection? We don't choose these things. We inherit them. We absorb them like air, unseen, unquestioned, unchallenged. We don't wake up one morning and say, I want to live this way. We wake up and realize, I'm already living it. And we wonder why we feel empty. Because we've spent our lives collecting other people's dreams. And forgotten how to dream our own. Think of the last time you bought something because it was trending. You didn't need it. You didn't even like it much. But everyone else had it. And so, you did too. Think of the last time you stayed silent during a conversation because you disagreed but feared being the odd one out. You didn't speak. Not because you agreed. But because you were afraid of being alone in your thought. We have been trained to equate safety with sameness. To mistake popularity for truth. To confuse belonging with surrender. And yet, this is not weakness. It's survival. For millennia, humans survived by staying close to the group. To stand apart meant danger. To disagree meant exile. To be different meant death. So our brains still respond to consensus as if it were life or death. But now, we live in a world where the group isn't the village. It's the algorithm. It's the influencer. It's the viral post. It's the faceless mass of millions clicking like on a trend they don't understand. And we follow. Because we're scared of being left behind. But what if belonging doesn't require conformity? What if true connection comes not from blending in, but from daring to be quietly, authentically yourself, even when no one else is? What if the most radical act of selfhood today isn't rebellion, but silence? Not joining the noise. Not copying the script. Just pausing long enough to ask, is this mine? Or did I just pick it up along the way? You don't have to reject society. You don't have to become an outsider. You just have to notice. Notice how often you say yes, not because you want to, but because you assume everyone else already did. Notice how often you change your mind, not because you've thought it through, but because someone else said it first. Notice how often you feel lonely, even surrounded by people, because you've spent your life echoing them, and forgotten how to hear your own voice. We are not broken for following the crowd. We are human. But we can choose, quietly, gently, to stop pretending that popularity equals purpose. To stop assuming that if it's widespread, it's sacred. To stop measuring our worth by the number of people who agree with us. Because the moment you realize you've been living someone else's life, you also realize you can begin to live your own. Not by rejecting others, but by reclaiming yourself. One choice at a time. One quiet no to the crowd. One honest yes to your soul. And if you ever feel lost, if you ever wonder who you are beneath all the echoes, just remember, you were never meant to be the most popular. You were meant to be the most you. Now imagine whispering something you're not supposed to tell them. Watch what happens next. Forbidden knowledge is irresistible. Not because it's true. Not because it's useful. But because it was never meant for you. You felt it, the sudden stillness when someone leans in, lowers their voice, glances around as if the walls might be listening. I probably shouldn't tell you this. And then, like a match struck in a dark room, it happens. But I think your boss hates your presentation. No one's saying it, but the promotion's already been given to her. The company's going under next quarter. They just haven't told anyone yet. You don't question it. You don't fact-check it. You don't ask where they got it from. You lean in. Your breath catches. Your pulse quickens. Your mind races, not with logic, but with urgency. Because now, you know something no one else does. You've been granted access to the hidden layer of reality. The forbidden truth. The unspoken rule. And in that moment, you don't feel like a recipient of gossip, you feel like an initiate. A confidant. A keeper of secrets. This isn't manipulation. It's evolution. Psychologists call it the reactive information effect. When information is framed as restricted, taboo, or off-limits, the brain treats it not as rumor, but as revelation. The very act of being told not to share it makes it more valuable. Your amygdala lights up. Your curiosity overrides skepticism. Your need to belong, to be part of the inner circle, overpowers your critical thinking. It's why gossip spreads faster than facts. Why conspiracy theories thrive on whispered warnings. Why cult leaders begin with, most people won't understand this, but you're different, you can handle the truth. We are drawn to secrets not because they enlighten us, but because they elevate us. To know what others don't know is to feel chosen. To hold forbidden knowledge is to feel powerful. Even if that knowledge is false. Even if it's harmful. Even if it's nothing more than a half-remembered rumor dressed in gravity. Think of the last time someone whispered something damaging about a colleague, or a friend, and you didn't dismiss it. You didn't say, "Where did you hear that?" You said, "Oh my God, I had no idea." And then, you told someone else. You didn't want to spread it because you believed it. You spread it because you needed to feel like you were part of the select few who saw beneath the surface. We don't crave clarity. We crave mystery. Because clarity demands responsibility. Mystery gives us permission to wonder. To imagine. To feel special for knowing what others don't. And so, the whisper becomes sacred. The secret becomes identity. But here's the haunting implication. What if truth is only valuable when it's stolen? What if we have been trained to distrust open honesty, and worship concealed revelation? What if we've forgotten how to believe in directness? What if we've come to mistrust anything that's plainly stated, because it feels too ordinary, too safe, too unremarkable. And when someone whispers a secret to you, do you owe them loyalty? Do you owe them silence? Do you owe them gratitude for trusting you? Or do you owe yourself something far more dangerous? The question, why did they want you to hear this? Who benefits from this secret being shared? Was it meant to bond you? Or to isolate you from the person being talked about, from the truth, from your own judgment? Was this secret really a gift? Or was it a trap, a way to pull you into their world of suspicion, resentment, and hidden agendas? Every whispered secret carries a hidden cost. It doesn't just reveal information. It changes relationships. It creates alliances built on exclusion. It turns you from observer into accomplice. And once you're inside the circle, if you repeat it, if you believe it, if you let it shape your view of someone, you can't easily leave. You become bound by the very thing you were told to keep quiet. We forget that secrecy isn't always about protection. Sometimes, it's about control. The person who whispers, "I shouldn't tell you this," isn't offering you truth. They're offering you a role. A position. A stake in their narrative. And once you take it, you're no longer neutral. You're complicit. So the next time someone leans in, eyes wide, voice hushed, don't rush to absorb the secret. Don't rush to react. Pause. Breathe. Ask yourself, why me? Why now? What do they gain by making me feel like the only one who knows? Because the most dangerous secrets aren't those that expose corruption. They're the ones that make you feel like you've been let in, when really, you've been recruited. You didn't find the truth. You were handed a weapon disguised as a gift. And once you realize that, once you stop mistaking secrecy for intimacy, you begin to see. The most powerful people don't whisper secrets to win your trust. They speak plainly, so you'll trust them anyway. They don't hide truths to make you feel special. They reveal them clearly, so you'll know they're worth believing. And you? You don't need to be the one who hears the whispered thing. You just need to be the one who refuses to carry it. Because sometimes, the greatest act of wisdom isn't hearing the secret, but choosing not to repeat it. Not because you're afraid, but because you finally understand. Some doors aren't meant to be opened. Some truths aren't meant to be known. And some voices aren't meant to be trusted. Just heard, and quietly, gently, left behind. And sometimes, the most effective influence isn't direct. It's distraction. Make them chase you. By pretending you're not paying attention. Attention is the most valuable currency in human interaction, more precious than money, more lasting than praise, more intimate than confession. And yet, we give it away too freely. We lean in when asked. We respond instantly. We nod, smile, and offer our full presence as if it were a gift that should never be withheld. But what if the most powerful way to command attention isn't to demand it, but to make it feel scarce? When you act slightly distracted, your gaze drifting toward the window, your fingers idly tapping your phone, your voice pausing mid-sentence as if you've forgotten what you were saying, the other person doesn't feel ignored. They feel unseen. And that's precisely the point. It's not about disinterest. It's not about rudeness. It's not about indifference. It's strategy disguised as absence. You don't need to raise your voice. You don't need to insist. You don't even need to speak. Just look away for half a second longer than feels comfortable. Let your attention flicker, not toward them, but toward something just beyond them, the rain on the glass, the clock ticking, the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then return, slowly, reluctantly, as if you'd been pulled back from somewhere far away. And watch what happens. They lean forward. Their voice tightens. They repeat themselves, not because they weren't clear before, but because now, they're afraid you'll miss it. They offer more detail. They reveal vulnerabilities they hadn't intended to share. I know I've been quiet lately, but I'm really struggling with this. I didn't want to say anything, but I think you might be right about the deadline. Honestly, I was terrified to bring this up. They didn't volunteer this before. But now, because you seem to be slipping away, they scramble to hold on to you. They beg for your focus, not with words of persuasion, but with the raw, trembling honesty of someone who fears losing you. This is attention scarcity. A psychological dynamic so primal, so deeply rooted in our evolutionary need for social connection, that we will rewrite our own narratives just to be seen again. We are tribal creatures. We evolved to read micro-expressions, to track eye contact, to sense when belonging is at risk. When someone withdraws their attention, even momentarily, we interpret it as rejection. Not necessarily conscious rejection. Just distance. A signal that we're no longer part of the group. And so, instinctively, we do whatever it takes to restore the bond. We perform. We explain. We confess. We become more vulnerable, not because we want to, but because we fear being left behind. In therapy, clinicians use this technique deliberately. They don't stare. They don't nod constantly. They let silences linger. They glance down at their notebook as if taking notes, then slowly lift their eyes, just as the client is about to reveal something profound. The client, sensing the shift, rushes to finish the thought, I think I'm scared I'll never be enough. The therapist says nothing. But the secret is out. In negotiations, executives pause mid-sentence to check their watches. They don't say, I'm bored. They don't need to. The silence does it for them. And suddenly, the other side lowers their price. Offers concessions. Reveals hidden constraints they swore they'd never disclose. In relationships, one partner turns away during an emotional conversation, pretending to be absorbed in their phone, and the other, panicked by the withdrawal, blurts out, I'm sorry I've been distant. I've just been overwhelmed. I didn't mean to shut you out. They didn't plan to say that. But they needed the attention back too badly to keep holding it in. What does this say about us? Are we all chasing approval, because we were taught, early and often, that love is conditional? That attention must be earned? That to be worthy of care, we must perform, please, prove, or plead? We are raised to believe that if we are quiet, we are ignored. If we are still, we are unloved. If we are uncertain, we are unworthy. So we over-explain. We overshare. We overplease. We exhaust ourselves trying to stay in the light. And then, someone who has learned to withhold, deliberately, calmly, quietly, becomes irresistible. Because they don't chase. They don't beg. They don't need to be liked. And in their stillness, they become the center of gravity. Do you become the god of someone else's worth? Perhaps. Not by design. But by consequence. When you withhold attention, you don't control the person, you control the value they assign to your presence. You teach them, this is rare. This is sacred. This is not guaranteed. And once they learn that lesson, they will rearrange their entire world to earn even a sliver of it. This is not manipulation. It is reflection. It reveals how desperately we crave validation, and how easily we surrender our boundaries to obtain it. But here's the quiet tragedy. We don't have to live this way. We don't have to chase attention to feel worthy. We don't have to perform to be loved. We don't have to earn the right to be heard. But until we heal that wound inside, the belief that we are only valuable when someone is looking, we will remain prisoners of those who know how to make us beg. And so, when you choose to appear distracted, when you let your gaze wander, when you pause mid-sentence, when you let the silence stretch, you aren't playing a game. You're exposing one. You're showing others, without saying a word, how much they've been trained to sacrifice themselves for a flicker of recognition. And perhaps, in doing so, you remind them, gently, painfully, beautifully, that they deserve more than a glance. That they deserve to be held, not because they performed, but because they exist. And you? You don't need to chase attention. You just need to hold eyes. And let silence speak. Eyes don't lie. But they can be used to make you believe lies. You've felt it, the moment someone locks eyes with you and something inside you softens. You're in a negotiation. You're being sold something. You're hearing bad news. You're listening to a friend say, "I'm fine." And then, they look at you. Not quickly. Not nervously. Not glancing away as if afraid of what you might see. But steadily. 4-6 seconds. 8. Maybe longer. And just like that, you believe them. Not because their words made sense. Not because the logic was flawless. But because their gaze held yours. This isn't magic. It's neuroscience. Sustained eye contact, what psychologists call gaze anchoring, triggers the release of oxytocin, the same hormone activated during bonding, breastfeeding, and romantic connection. It reduces activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, and dampens skepticism. Your prefrontal cortex, the part that questions, analyzes, resists, slows down. The barrier between self and other thins. You don't just hear what they're saying. You feel it. As if their truth has entered your body through the eyes alone. Salespeople are trained to hold this gaze for exactly 6 to 8 seconds. Long enough to build trust. Short enough to avoid discomfort. Therapists use it to create safety before a client speaks their deepest shame. Politicians practice it in front of mirrors, rehearsing the perfect blend of warmth and authority. They don't stare. They connect. They mirror your rhythm. They blink slowly, deliberately, like a calm breath shared between two people who have already agreed, without speaking, that this moment matters. It is not intimacy. It is installation. They are not falling in love with you. You are falling into their narrative. Because when you lock eyes, you surrender, not your mind, but your resistance. You stop thinking. You start feeling. And in that shift, persuasion becomes effortless. You agree not because you were convinced. You agree because you felt seen. And being seen feels like belonging. And belonging feels like truth. Think of the last time someone asked you to do something difficult, a favor, a confession, a change, and you said yes, even though you didn't want to. Why? Was it their argument? Their logic? Their reasoning? Or was it the way they looked at you, softly, patiently, as if they already knew you'd say yes? As if your answer had already been decided, by your own reflection in their eyes? We assume agreement comes from reason. But most decisions are made in the silent space between heartbeats, before language begins, after instinct has already whispered its verdict. And in that space, the eyes speak louder than any sentence ever could. What if connection is not about sharing stories, but about prolonged vulnerability? What if true intimacy isn't found in confessions, but in stillness? In the unbroken gaze where no one speaks, yet everything is understood? And what if agreement isn't reason at all? What if it's reflected? In the pupil that dilates when you say something raw. In the blink that slows when you name a fear aloud. In the micro-movement of the eyelid that says, "I see you. I am here. I won't look away." We think we choose our beliefs. We think we decide our loyalties. We think we form opinions through analysis. But how many times have you nodded along to an idea you didn't fully understand, just because the person speaking held your gaze too long? How many times have you apologized for something you didn't do, because their eyes filled with tears and you couldn't bear to look away? How many times have you said I'm sorry when you meant I'm scared, simply because their eyes made you feel like you owed them honesty? The eyes don't lie. But they can make us lie to ourselves. They can make us believe we want what we're told we should want. They can make us trust those who manipulate our need to belong. They can make us surrender our boundaries, not because we were forced, but because we were seen, and in that seeing, we forgot how to say no. This is why cult leaders, charlatans, and politicians master the art of the steady gaze. They don't need to convince you. They need to make you feel safe enough to let your guard down. And once your eyes meet theirs, once you allow yourself to be held in that quiet, wordless exchange, you become vulnerable. You become open. You become willing. And then, they ask. And you say yes. Not because you wanted to, but because you couldn't bear to break the spell. So next time someone holds your gaze, not to comfort you, not to guide you, not even to love you, pause. Ask yourself, are they seeing me? Or are they using my need to be seen to sell me something? Because the most dangerous thing about eye contact isn't that it reveals truth. It's that it makes us want to believe, even when we know better. We are so starved for connection that we'll trade our skepticism for a glance. We'll give up our autonomy for a moment of belonging. We'll accept a lie, just to feel real. But perhaps the most powerful act of sovereignty today is not to look away out of fear, but to look, and still choose your own truth. To meet their gaze, and not let it rewrite you. To see clearly, to feel deeply, and to remember, even in the silence between two souls, you still get to decide what belongs to you. And sometimes, to receive, you must give first. Even if it's small. Even if it's secret. To be trusted, you must first be vulnerable. It sounds counterintuitive. We've been taught that power lies in control, that strength means holding back, guarding your heart, never revealing weakness. That to be seen as competent, you must appear flawless. But the most profound connections, the ones that last, that heal, that transform, are not built on perfection. They are forged in the quiet, trembling act of sharing something small. Something real. Something only you know. You say it softly. I used to be terrified of public speaking. Or, I still cry when I hear that song. Or, I was ashamed to tell anyone I lost my job last year. Just a whisper. Not a plea. Not an excuse. Just truth, lightly offered, like a leaf placed gently on a windowsill. And then, you wait. And almost always, they respond. I didn't know. I used to panic before every exam. That song, my mom played it the day she died. I had mine too. I thought everyone else had it together. They don't do it because they're kind. They do it because they feel compelled. This is the reciprocity norm, an invisible law of human behavior so deeply wired into our biology that we obey it without thinking. When someone gives us something, even something as intangible as a secret, we feel an urgent, almost physical need to give something back. It's not generosity. It's obligation. A social debt settled not with money, but with trust. In studies conducted by Robert Cialdini, researchers found that people who received a small favor, like a free soda, were far more likely to comply with a later request, even if it was unrelated. The same applies to vulnerability. When you share a personal truth, no matter how minor, you create a psychological imbalance. The other person feels the weight of your openness, and to restore equilibrium, they offer their own. It's not manipulation. It's humanity. We are tribal creatures. We evolved to bond through shared risk. In ancestral groups, those who revealed their fears were not seen as weak, they were seen as safe. Because vulnerability signaled trustworthiness. It said, I am not hiding. You can be here too. And so, the mirror reflex kicks in. If you're open with me, I'll be open with you. And in that exchange, walls dissolve. A manager shares that she once doubted her promotion was deserved. An employee, stunned, admits he's been considering quitting. A parent says, I was scared I'd mess up parenting, and their teenager whispers, I thought I was the only one who felt like a failure. No lecture. No advice. No solution. Just two truths, quietly exchanged, and suddenly, the space between them becomes sacred. But here's the haunting question, is intimacy just a transaction? Are we bonding not through raw, unfiltered truth, but through traded vulnerability? Do we love each other not for who we are, but for what we're willing to give up to prove we're real? Think of the last time you confessed something painful, not because you needed healing, but because you wanted to make someone else feel safe enough to speak. Did you give your secret hoping to receive one in return? Did you think, if I show mine, maybe they'll show theirs? If so, you weren't being selfish. You were being human. We have forgotten how to connect without exchange. We've turned closeness into currency. We measure depth by the number of secrets shared. We equate trust with reciprocity. We assume that if someone doesn't answer our vulnerability with their own, they don't care. But what if that's not true? What if some people carry their pain quietly, not because they don't trust you, but because they're afraid of burdening you? What if silence isn't rejection, it's reverence? And when you give a secret, do you lose power? Or do you finally become real? Because here's the paradox. The moment you stop performing strength, the moment you allow yourself to be imperfect, to be unsure, to be afraid, you don't become weaker. You become magnetic. Power isn't in control. It's in surrender. When you share a secret, you give away something fragile. But in doing so, you invite someone else to drop their armor too. You create a space where neither of you has to pretend. Where authenticity isn't risky, it's rewarded. And in that space, relationships aren't built on approval. They're built on presence. You don't need to fix them. You don't need to solve their pain. You just need to say, I'm scared too. I've been there. I'm not perfect. And suddenly, they feel less alone. We live in a world obsessed with performance, where LinkedIn profiles showcase triumphs, Instagram feeds display curated joy, and therapy sessions are often replaced with hashtags. We are drowning in polished facades. And yet, beneath all that noise, we are starving for something real. So when someone dares to whisper, I'm not okay, we lean in, not because we want to fix them, but because we've been waiting our whole lives to hear someone say it first. And when we do, when we give our secret, small and trembling, we don't lose control. We reclaim connection. We become the bridge, not the guard. We become the example, not the authority. We become the proof that it's safe to be human. And perhaps, in this age of isolation, that is the most radical thing you can do. So next time you hesitate, afraid to speak, afraid to be judged, afraid you'll be seen as weak, remember, vulnerability isn't the opposite of strength. It's its quietest, most courageous form. Share your secret. Not because you expect one in return, but because you deserve to be known. And if someone meets you with their own truth, let it be a gift, not a debt. Because sometimes, the deepest bonds aren't formed by what we take. They're formed by what we dare to give and let go of. Finally, the most potent trick of all, not to offer something, but to make them believe it's disappearing. Time isn't linear. But perception of time? That's the most powerful illusion of all. You've seen it everywhere, subtle, relentless, woven into the fabric of modern life. Only 2 spots left. This offer ends tonight. I'm leaving in 10 minutes. They sound like warnings. They feel like emergencies. They are not requests, they are commands disguised as options. And you respond. Not because you need it. Not because you want it. But because you're afraid you'll miss out. You click. You buy. You sign. You commit. And then, hours later, you wonder why. The truth is, there were never only 2 spots. The offer was still available tomorrow. The person didn't leave. They just said they would. None of it was urgent. But your fear made it so. This is loss aversion, the most potent force in human decision-making. Psychologists have shown that we feel the pain of losing something twice as intensely as we feel the pleasure of gaining it. We don't act because we desire. We act because we dread absence. The thought of missing an opportunity triggers a primal alarm. If you don't take this now, you will be left behind. It doesn't matter if the thing is valuable. It doesn't matter if you needed it. What matters is that you believe it might vanish, and with it, some part of your future self. Urgency isn't about deadlines. It's about fear. And fear doesn't reason. It bypasses logic. It silences doubt. It overrides intention. In moments of manufactured urgency, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that plans, reflects, and chooses, goes offline. Your amygdala takes over. The lizard brain. The survival brain. The part that once screamed run when a predator appeared. Now, it screams buy when a countdown timer hits 3:59. We've been trained to mistake panic for purpose. We think we're being proactive when we rush. We call it seizing the moment. But what if it's just obedience? What if every time you rush to act, you're not making a choice, you're responding to a cue? Think of how many decisions you've made under pressure. The job you took because the offer expired in 48 hours. The relationship you stayed in because this might be your last chance. The purchase you made because everyone else is buying it. The therapy you avoided because you can start next month, until next month became next year, and then never. These weren't choices born from clarity. They were reactions born of anxiety. And who profits from that anxiety? Corporations. Algorithms. Advertisers. Politicians. Even well-meaning coaches and influencers who whisper, "Don't wait, your window is closing." They don't care if you're ready. They care if you're scared. Because fear sells. FOMO, fear of missing out, is the most profitable emotion on earth. It turns passivity into action. It turns hesitation into conversion. It turns your longing into their revenue. We are living inside a machine designed to make us feel perpetually behind. There's always another deadline. Another sale. Another chance slipping away. Your worth is tied to productivity. Your love is tied to timing. Your success is tied to speed. You must grow faster. Earn more. Love harder. Sleep less. And so you run. Not towards something meaningful, but away from the terror of being too late. Are we rushing through life? Because we've been trained to believe time is running out? Or because someone told us it was, again and again, until we stopped questioning it? What happens when you stop chasing urgency? When you pause before clicking buy? When you say no to the limited time offer? When you let the deadline pass without panic? When you sit with the silence and ask, what am I really afraid of losing? Do you become invisible to the machine? Perhaps. But perhaps you become free. Because the machine needs your haste. It needs your fear. It needs you to believe that peace is passive, that rest is surrender, that waiting is weakness. But what if the opposite is true? What if slowing down isn't failure? What if choosing not to act isn't laziness, but wisdom? What if the most radical act in a world obsessed with urgency is to do nothing at all? When you stop rushing, you begin to notice. You notice how often you've been manipulated by artificial scarcity. You notice how often your peace has been sold back to you as a product. You notice that the things you truly wanted, quiet mornings, deep conversations, unstructured days, were never on sale. They were always available. You just forgot to look for them without a timer ticking. And here's the quiet revolution. Peace doesn't come from doing more. It comes from realizing you never had to rush to deserve it. You don't need to be first. You don't need to be fastest. You don't need to be the one who acted before the clock ran out. You just need to be here. Now. Without panic. When you stop chasing urgency. You stop giving away your power. You stop letting strangers dictate the rhythm of your soul. You stop believing that your value is measured in speed. And slowly, quietly, you begin to live again. Not in fragments of frantic action, but in fullness of presence. The truth is, nothing you truly need is disappearing. The love you seek isn't going anywhere. The peace you long for isn't limited edition. The time you have isn't running out. It's just being stolen. By algorithms, by ads, by voices that profit from your fear. So the next time you hear, only 2 spots left. This ends tonight. You won't get another chance. Don't react. Pause. Breathe. Ask yourself, who benefits if I hurry? What am I really afraid of? And what if I already have everything I need, right here, right now? Because the greatest trick of all isn't convincing you to act. It's making you believe you don't have time to choose. And once you realize that, once you stop running from a clock that wasn't yours to begin with, you don't just find peace. You reclaim your life. From the outside, you may seem invisible. To the machine, you may seem lost. But inside, you are finally, deeply awake. G. You've just traveled through 27 ways your mind can be gently, silently, invisibly guided. None of these are evil. None are magical. They're just human. We use them to connect, to protect, to survive. But now, you see them. And seeing is the first step toward freedom. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, listen to the silence between words. Notice the pause before a reply. Feel the weight of a glance. Hear the echo of your own name. And remember, you are not powerless. You are simply awake. The world will keep using these tricks. But now, you know. Sleep well. You're safe. You're enough. Good night.